They actually lowered them again at their last board meeting for the fourth time in a row.
Taxes on my house are awful.
That's for the PowerPoint that's going to be starting after I do the introduction.
I'm excited to see this.
It's all about the Boardman Crossing.
Yeah, I'm excited to see this.
Connie's gonna be over there, right? Okay. All right. Okay. So we're gonna call this meeting to order. We apologize for a few minutes late. We had some coffee issues this morning. Could you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could I have the roll call, please?
Horn,
Here.
Heeman,
Here.
Tillman, absent and excused. Kazem,
Here.
Underwood.
Here. Approval of the agenda. Is there any?
I'll make the motion.
Support.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is there any conflict of interest? Seeing none. Public comment. Is there anybody that wishes to make a public comment at the beginning of the meeting? Seeing none, we're going to move right into the workshop, and I'm going to have Brad introduce what's going to happen.
Okay, this morning we're going to be talking about all of the corridors, the traffic corridors within the county that have high congestion or high volumes. We're going to start with some history of the Hammond-Hartman corridor and the bridge crossing, sort of to say this is our main capacity focus right now. So we'll go through that, and then we're going to have a GIS map up, and we're going to start talking specifically about where we realize that there are extreme high volumes within the county and where we're noticing some congestion. So this will be a two-part deal. We're going to let the consultants come in and talk first about the actual bridge crossing that we've been talking about, and then after that we'll take a little break, I believe, and then we'll move into the corridors. And then when we talk about the corridors, we have Steve Deering. He's a traffic engineer, very well-respected traffic engineer, and he will be able to tell you guys a lot of information about that. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Bill and let Bill kind of introduce his team and tell you what's going on with the crossing project.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Zip with OHM Advisors in Livonia, and we are under contract to the Road Commission to develop currently to develop the environmental assessment for the river crossing. I wanted to introduce my team. They're a very strong team. First, as he said, this is Steve Deering, traffic engineer for OHM, very well respected, tons of career in modeling and all traffic aspects. In the back is Todd Davis. Todd is with WSP. WSP is very nationwide, specifically on this case for, Todd is a planner, and he's a NEPA expert, National Environmental Protection Agency, or I always get that screwed up. Sorry, Todd. NEPA. Todd is very well versed, and WSP is a nationwide expert in that. So what we'd like to do is first give you a brief history of the crossing. It goes way back, and we want to give you that history, and then we're going to talk about what we're doing now. Todd will talk about the NEPA process, and then we'll move beyond that to as your desire. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Steve, and he's going to give us a history lesson. So.
Thank you again. The name is Steve Deering, and I'm a senior technical leader for OHM. What was interesting when I was first asked to kind of put together a history or chronology of what was happening, I thought I knew. I knew that there had been an environmental impact study, a EIS, that had been approved, but when it was time to go after permits, for whatever reason, everything fell apart. But I found that the job didn't really start as an EIS. So if you could go to the next slide, please. The next one. Actually,
Excuse me, you used an acronym, EIS. Could you please tell the folks what that means?
EIS is Environmental Impact Study.
Thank you.
The other acronym I'm going to use a lot of is EA, or Environmental Assessment.
Okay, thank you.
They are both of them environmental clearances. The EA, or Environmental Assessment, is considered less arduous or strenuous than a full-blown Environmental Impact Study, or EIS. So they both do the same thing. They provide an environmental clearance for a project. But again, they're different degrees or intensities of work or evaluation. So the job actually started back in the 1990s as an environmental assessment to do the replacement of the Cass Road Bridge as it sat as a one-lane structure over on top of that old hydroelectric plant. And the Road Commission hired a consulting firm to help them with that process. They got going on it. And within a relatively short time of starting, it morphed. So it was still looking at doing the environmental clearance of the Cass Road Bridge to replace it as part of the removal of the dam, but also look at a new crossing of the Boardman River. And that process led to the alignment of Hartman-Hammond. The process was followed. They got almost to the bitter end, and one of the things you do with any kind of an environmental clearance is you have to have a formal public hearing at the end to present the results. And as a result of that public hearing, the regulatory agency said, this really isn't an EA. You really should have been doing an EIS, which is the more strict and stringent. So they stopped that, and it took another 2 years to provide the additional information and evaluation and analysis to get it into the form of a EIS, which then resulted in a record of decision that was issued in 2002. So, I want to make this as an important point because people are wondering about, if you're bridging the river, where should the bridge be? How high is it going to be above the valley? Well, at the time this was all being done, that stretch of Hammond Road from Keystone to Lafreniere had not been built. So if we can go to the next slide, this is what that original, starting out as an EA, ending up as an EIS, this is what it was suggesting. And I still have not been able to resolve whether the dollar figure was construction only, but I suspect it was based on some of the other numbers for different alternatives. They were basically construction only numbers, so I'm thinking this was also. And if that's the case, it does not include design, construction engineering, or most importantly, right-of-way. Anyway, the idea is that its intersection with US 31 was going to be opposite Silver Pines. It was then going to proceed to the east, but it was going to swing to the north to get back onto the Hartman alignment. That was going to be achieved west of Draca. The original concept was for a 4-lane boulevard from 31 to Cass. Then it was going to go over the railroad tracks on the east side of Cass at grade. It was going to bridge the river as a 4-lane structure. It was going to be pushed way, way down into the valley. And it was going to basically just bridge the river with a 200-foot span. So they were minimizing the bridge. And as a result of that, it was going to have a lot of embankment placed in the river valley to minimize the length of the bridge itself. The valley is irregularly shaped, so in terms of the road over the valley, it varied between 18 to 35 foot. There was about just under 4 acres of permanent wetland impact. The wetland impacts were greater than that, but some of it was construction only that could then be restored. Once it got over the river, it was going to go up to Keystone, and it was intended to cross the Keystone Railroad, the railroad immediately east of Keystone, at grade, right at the top of the tracks. That's when it was supposed to cross there. Then as either a 4 or 5 lane road, it was supposed to climb up to Lafreniere. And what I found really curious as a technical kind of geek is they were assuming a design speed of 70 miles an hour, which is like freeway. They were designing a freeway, as opposed to logically wanting to post a speed limit as 55. So then if you can go on. It started out as an environmental assessment, ended up as an environmental impact study. All of the environmental clearance processes require public input, and most of the public outreach was by way of a citizen advisory committee, invitation only. Once the EIS was finalized, the Road Commission actually got into design. They hired a firm, a couple firms, I believe, a partnership type thing. They started the design, and they got to a point where they could start looking to the resource agencies and asking for permit applications. And that's where everything just kind of ground to a halt. Not that all of the permitting agencies refused permits, but many of them did. And they were the really important ones. So basically the project ground to the halt. And as far as I could tell, looking at the record documents, the correspondence that are in the Road Commission's files, it appears that almost all of the objections were because the permitting agencies did not believe that the public participation was robust enough. They don't believe that the outreach to public comment was sufficient to have informed the decisions on whether this was the best alternative. And basically because of that, no permits, we're not in a position to be able to build, and the project basically died. So that's kind of that time frame. Time passes, the Road Commission's dealing with other issues around the county, but the idea of this being in the forefront of your mind remained because it's a big piece of the puzzle for the network that represents Grand Traverse County Road Commission. So with that all said, you commissioned a east-west corridor study. At that point, you hired our firm, OHM Advisors, with our team. And one of the first things that we did in looking at this, we went and found out enough that the older effort failed because of public participation issues. So that's why the east-west corridor study put public participation in the forefront. We used local advisory groups, which I'll talk about a little bit later in a different slide. We had public workshops, we had interest group workshops, we did some survey work with citizens, we had a dedicated project webpage, and we also did media outreach, all of which was intended to make sure that the environmental clearance process, which so strongly focuses on public participation, was being met in all regards. Next slide, please. So it was actually the public participant process that helped us identify the fact that east-west mobility is a big deal, but there's also these other public concerns about what are you doing in the meantime? What are the low-hanging fruit? You should be fixing this intersection, or what about that stretch of road? Above and beyond the broader grand vision kind of things for the network. And so what the project team did is we actually identified a whole list of potential projects that would represent improvements to both safety and mobility, mostly focused in the corridor that would serve east-west traffic. And the next slide shows some of the things that we were able to do. So these are improvements that were coming out of the East-West Corridor study, and we stratified them into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And all these check marks represent things that are pretty much done or about to be done by the Road Commission. We recommended signal optimization. That was a great thing. You got it done. Then you went a step further and put in Scoot, which is a automated system that helps keep signals optimized in close to real time. So you didn't just retime those old pre-time controllers, you actually put a system in to help them react to traffic shifts. So that was above and beyond. That's what Scoot is. It's an adaptive traffic system. And then you've got all these different intersections that you've worked on and have completed. So you're well down over half that list in terms of being able to make an impact on these locations. And these locations represent both safety and capacity issues that impact East-West Corridor mobility. Next slide, looking at the middle term and longer term. The East-West Corridor study said, in addition to this, you might want to look at improvements to South Airport Road. And we identified two large segments where our thought was maybe a 4-lane boulevard would work. Also, a stretch of Keystone from Hammond down to Cass. Maybe that needs to go from its current two-lane road to a 5-lane. All of these require some sort of an environmental clearance. So the Keystone piece was actually looked at with the subsequent study to East-West Corridor study, which was the Boardman River Crossing PEL. PEL stands for Planning and Environmental Linkages. So that Keystone was looked at, and it was rejected because of the impacts. Keystone runs parallel to that railroad track. So if you want to widen that road, you have to do it entirely to the west where all the houses are. So if you want a 5-lane Keystone, you're looking at buying up and knocking down almost every house along that stretch. And that was considered an unacceptable impact, and so that was taken off the table. It's not that you can't buy properties to widen roads, but just the magnitude of how many you would have to take put that kind of off the table, so to speak. And then for the other pieces of South Airport, that is now part of this environmental process that we're in right now. We're not only just looking at Hartman-Hammond. South Airport is still on the table as an alternative. And then we look at, so all of those medium terms have been addressed or are about to be addressed. And then finally, looking at the long term, we recommended that you look and try to evaluate that if you are going to have a new river crossing, where should it be? And that's what that PEL was all about, and that's done. And then we were saying that you have to undertake an environmental clearance of whatever the preferred alternative is, and that's what we're doing literally right now. So of all of these short, medium, and long term, you pretty much have got them all in the bag except for a few short term that you're still working on. But you're well on the way of satisfying every recommendation that was in that corridor study. Next slide then, please. Again, public engagement was the end-all be-all of the East-West Corridor study. And that carried over into the next study, which was the Boardman River Crossing Planning and Environmental Linkages study. So that took about 3 years. And we had a local advisory group, and we couldn't put everybody invited on one slide. For example, we'd have to name all of the townships That's a long list. And it was townships essentially in Grand Traverse County, but also some of the neighboring, like in Leelanau County, that would be part, within the impact area of our evaluation. But we had the different county components, the county itself, the Drain Commission, Conservation District. We had Leelanau County, the county and the Road Commission for Leelanau both participated. We had all the townships, we had the villages, the city, and then a whole variety of groups, Disability Network, Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities, Norte. You can read the list, it's all there. Then we had what we call mobility actors. These are the people that have transportation responsibilities. Obviously BATA, the airport, and even though it's a private not-for-profit, TART, because of how the regional trail system is and truly is a mobility feature for this area, we wanted to get them involved too. And then, the other government type agencies, the Intermediate School District for Traverse City, Northwestern Michigan College, and of course the Grand Traverse Band. Next slide, please. In addition to having those as our local advisory group, we also then outreach and had detailed conversations in a workshop setting with all of your EMS providers, BATA, the school district, the Park and Trails folks, and the Conservation District. And then throughout all of that, we were then also doing open houses with the public. So we had a series of meetings with that. Next slide. It is an environmental clearance, so you can't only just look at traffic. So this is all of the types of criteria that represented the scorecard. And we developed this first before we even started looking at alternatives, because the idea is you got to figure out ahead of time what you consider important before you start saying, well, I like this versus that alternative. That makes it sure that you don't try to adjust the scorecard to favor something you might have a predisposition for. So, wetland impacts, fragmentation of forests, consistency with master plans, looking at potential impacts to like conservation easements, and of course we have railroads on both sides. So what did that look like in terms of trying to figure things out? So again, this represents everything that was evaluated during the Pell. And if you can go to the next slide, this is what we came up with. The costs are still being looked at. They're being refined all the time, but they are intended to be all inclusive, including right-of-way and the design and construction engineering. We're not yet at a point where we can say for sure where the intersection of 31 is going to be, but it's either going to be opposite McCray Hill. McCray Hill actually intersects US 31 twice. This would be the northern or downhill intersection of McCray Hill. And if not that, if you think about that road, when you start back toward Chum's Corner, then it's nice and flat for a while, then it starts to dive. Well, it flattens for a little bit, not really flat, but it's a lot less grade before it dives again. The first dive is actually where Silver Pines is. And although the original study started in the 1990s was looking at that, that would have been a really interesting design because the 31 is so steep. If, for example, you put a signal in there, how are people going to stop on a snowy day when the signal turns red on them? Anyway, so there's that flat spot. So we're either looking at McCray Hill toward the downhill or north location, or that flat spot, which is near a business called Cherry Central. If it's the northern location, the project would literally flatten 31 to make sure that it would be a safe intersection. Or it could be, again, on the existing flat spot. Yet to be determined. There's pros and cons for both. We were looking at not a 4-lane boulevard, but a 5-lane between 31 and Cass. Still stays a 4-lane bridge. But now, especially since the east end by Keystone has been raised over 25 feet compared to what it had been, I mean, you built a lovely viaduct for that railroad. You don't want to tear it out again. So that's a fixed point in elevation, and once you start looking at the grade of over one railroad and at grade for the other railroad, you're almost driven to the point where the bridge has to stay high. You can't really push it hardly down into the valley at all. And that being the case, that actually helps on the environmental side, because you can do a bridge with very, very few piers that go down into the valley, which means you minimize the impacts to the wetland in the valley. And it's going to be a very long bridge, somewhere around 2,000 foot. And the fudge is depending on how you want to structure the abutments. It's, I think at its lowest, it's like 68 foot over the valley, but then it's going to be on a constant grade up toward Keystone. So 70 foot, we say generally, but there's spots where it's going to be even higher than that over the valley. The 4-lane to 5-lane road from Keystone to 3 Mile already exists. We've been working on that. Railroad tracks next to Cass, cross at grade. We're going to, of course, continue the use of the railroad bridge near Keystone. And it was just ludicrous to do a 70 mile an hour design. So, what's reasonable? 55. It's going to be posted 55. The excess associated with design speed just translates into cost. And you don't really need that kind of cost for this type of a roadway. And because of how important this was, we felt it was super incumbent upon us to make sure that we had really good coordination with all of the associated agencies, whether they were resource or permitting. So we reached out to Michigan DNR, Michigan Eagle, US EPA, Fish and Wildlife, Federal Highway. We had both the region and the TSC from MDOT involved, as well as their environmental folks. And when the PEL was finished and submitted to the coordinating and review agencies, we got letters coming back that basically said, Michigan DNR and US EPA, we agree that Hartman-Hammond is the reasonable, locally preferred alternative for a new river crossing. And all the other alternatives you had been looking at, including crossings near where the old Sabin Dam was, or using the Cass Road Bridge as an alternate, those you've justified not doing that. So those fall by the wayside. Going forward, you can carry the Hartman-Hammond as one of the alternatives. The other alternative for a build condition will be South Airport. And then we also received letters from Federal Highway and MDOT basically saying, okay, you did what you're supposed to do. The PEL meets all of the requirements of the NEPA process. And so, yes, you can move into the formal environmental clearance. And I think with that, Todd is going to start talking. And he's going to describe how, I believe, Federal Highway and MDOT agreed that it need not be an EIS, the really stringent environmental clearance, but instead could be just a EA, which is still important, but not nearly as strict.
Any comments there, Brad, at that point, or anybody? Keep going. Excuse me. Morning. Again, Bill introduced me. I'm Todd Davis. I'm with a company called WSP. We are working with the Road Commission and OHM. And again, I actually live in North Elk Rapids, so I'm a resident in the area and a lot more familiar with Airport Road in this area than I was a couple years ago. Brad just asked that, again, you heard a lot from Steve on the procedures we're following. And it all comes underneath this acronym, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. So I've been doing NEPA for over 30 years in various sizes of projects. Basically, the Road Commission deals with NEPA all the time, but this project is very sizable, so it has some unique characteristics. But the reason we're following this process is this is how you get through and make sure you're not just doing something that could get you in trouble, okay? So even going back to the East-West Corridor study, which was, how do you know you even need a bridge? If you had, what if you improve every road around, which Steve described, do you still need a bridge? And with the time frame that we looked at, 10 years, we came up with a lot of interim projects, which the Road Commission has already completed or in the works of completed. But if you look out, 20 more years, 30 more years, this area is still growing. And as a result, in the time frame it takes to get a bridge of any significance built, the recommendation was to move forward with this study, okay? So essentially, the reason NEPA works here is that it requires, and the reason it's here is federal agencies, requires them to assess environmental effects of actions prior to making decisions, okay? So an action includes funding, which is what kind of usually comes up as well. If you're using federal money, you have to have NEPA. Well, it's also policies, which don't come into play so much at the county level, permitting. So even if the Road Commission had all this money sitting in a vault somewhere and they want to go out and do their bridge, even a 2,000-foot bridge, they're going to need permits from DNR, Eagle, and those permits would also kick you back into some of these NEPA actions. So there is no way to go build a bridge without going through environmental review. That's what we want to make sure everybody understands. We're following a very specific process. You're not allowed to go out and just fill wetlands, destroy environmental areas, and all that stuff without going through the process. It's just not possible. Okay, next slide. And then we have 2 slides. So kind of a recap here of this process from top to bottom, okay? As the East-West Corridor study was a transportation study with the goal of looking at the whole system. We've mentioned PEL, which is Planning and Environment Linkages. It's pre-NEPA. But what Federal Highway did about 10 years ago with PEL, maybe 15 years ago, was let's bring some of the NEPA issues up so we can figure this out, which is a heavy dose of public engagement, which Steve has talked about. It's also a heavy dose of alternatives analysis. You have to look at a full range of alternatives, which we've done. And you also need to develop your purpose and need, which we've done as well. So those are very big outcomes from the PEL, which get carried forward into NEPA, which is designed to help streamline NEPA a little, because we are under a 12-month clock to complete an EA, environmental assessment, okay? So what goes into the environmental assessment, the key pieces of what we're doing is public engagement. This counts too. We're going to do a lot more once we get a little further in. Interagency coordination, we're going to continue to coordinate with DNR, Eagle, all the permitting agencies out there to make sure they know, even though we've come out of PEL, we still have to now start putting the meat on the bones for the, what are these piers going to be? What are the piers going to look like? How big of footprint will they have? How are you going to build this thing? What's the temporary impacts? Because you still have to get construction equipment down there. So we'll quantify all that with coordination. We'll update the purpose and need. Alternatives, we did, again, write off Sabin Dam and Cass as viable alternatives that meet the purpose and need. Airport Road's hanging around, but it's really a case of us doing our due diligence on Airport Road, because what Airport Road does not do is does not provide resiliency. Resiliency is a very important term now in transportation. I'm sure you've all heard of the floods in Detroit. We had the big floods up in the UP just about 3 summers ago. Resiliency is how does the system react to an event, and if Airport Road goes down, this area is in trouble. So this bridge would provide a lot of resiliency if it's built. And then we also look at impacts. What are the impacts? We quantify them, and if they're significant enough, we mitigate them. So for instance, wetlands, let's say we have an acre of wetlands fill, we will have to mitigate those acres. Sometimes it's 1-to-1, sometimes it's 2-to-1. If it's forested wetlands, high quality, 4-to-1. And the Road Commission has done this in other projects as well, and you'll mitigate these, okay? So mitigation is not just for ecological, it's also any impact that's significant. Noise, for instance. If we have a noise impact from the road, because there is no bridge there today, right, and it's going to have more traffic, so I know this has been one of the concerns from folks is noise. We already started this, a noise assessment, and it's very prescribed, and if there are impacts, we look at mitigation. Mitigation can be walls, which are probably unlikely due to densities out here, or if they don't have air conditioning, sometimes you help provide air conditioning. So for the most part, we have to mitigate if there's an impact. Then eventually design and construction. So I think that's it I had for NEPA. Any other outstanding questions on that?
There's just 2 more slides to show.
Okay.
I can talk to these topics.
I'll let Bill take that.
Recognizing how big this project is and how expensive it is, we've been encouraged by everybody to look at how we're going to build it. How can this be built? So we've come up with a phasing plan. There's 6 phases, as you see. 4 of them are construction. The first one is we're recommending the Keystone Hammond Roundabout, and that also includes a little bit of fill at the west end of Keystone, because it drops down, but they're in that first plateau, there's no wetlands. So we can fill that mechanically stabilized earth walls to minimize the impact to the adjacent properties, and then end it at an abutment for the bridge. The second phase would be at US 31, and as I think Steve talked about it, the McRae Hill alternative is what we're looking at, as well as the we call it the midline alternative, which goes to that flat spot. But that's not shown on this one. They're comparable as far as cost goes. It's the impacts to US 31 are quite a bit different on this one, but this one provides a nice continuation to the west. As a matter of fact, it's the section line. The third phase would be the Cass Road Hartman intersection, and the roundabout at that intersection. And the reason they're split like that, and the connection to phase 2 or phase 4, the second construction phase, is west of Dracas. There's a significant profile change necessary on Hartman Road going to the west from Cass. The fourth construction phase would be the bridge. Next slide. We've got 2 alternatives for we call it the segmental bridge. There are 5 different alternatives that we've developed in our type, size, and location study, which is required to analyze what type of bridge it would be, where would it be, how big would it be. That's what the type, size, and location means. So coming out of that study, we have adjusted this, which showed in the Pell, but we've adjusted this to be accurate and consistent with the type, size, and location study. This is 4 piers. Go to the next slide. No, well, I thought there were 2. There are only 1? Okay, I thought there were 2. We have 2 different alternatives, one with 4 piers and one with 5 piers. The only difference is how much impact are we going to have to the ground below. This shows that embankment on the east end of the bridge to minimize cost for bridge cost. It shows the features down below, and these are, by the way, this is accurate scale-wise vertically. You can see the trail. You can, if you look closely, you can see a person on the trail. I forget if we did that or not. Those trees, accurate to size, so they are going, the bridge is anticipated to clear the trees. You see the wetlands down there. There's, on the east side, there's River East Recreation Area. On the west side, there's the Boardman River Valley Trail and the Boardman Valley Nature Preserve. So those are the features, environmental features that would have to be mitigated. The parks at the bottom are a 4F feature. I don't think Todd got into that, but that's a specific, very detailed, very sensitive environmental study that has to be done, because those are 4F, those are parkland, and those are protected under the NEPA policies. So I just wanted to show this is where we're at currently. Brad, next step?
Well, I think
First of all,
Or next slide.
Next slide says thank you.
Just thank you. That's what I want. I wanted to thank you for listening
I
to
have a
us.
question.
Okay,
So,
we have a question.
yeah, the board should probably start.
I was wondering, of the phases that you showed, the 4 construction phases, which one requires the most significant right-of-way issues?
Between the phase, the blue phase at McRae Hill and US 31, and along Hartman, west of Cass, it's kind of a balance. The Hartman is where most of the right-of-way impacts are. There are some impacts at the east end, the church at the east end. We're not taking the church, but we are impacting church property. Most of it is in the Hartman section between Cass and, but the intent is to, and this is depending on funds, and we do have, in that number that we mentioned, we do have the right-of-way costs in there.
Right.
But that's today's idea, and who knows what's gonna happen with right-of-way negotiations, you never know.
So the timeline on the phases here, say from red to yellow, what kind of timeline, in a perfect world, if it all went well, no global pandemic shutdown or lack of materials or right-of-way issues, what kind of timeline are you looking at with
If the funds kept coming,
Right.
if we were able to keep the money coming, this would be done in 10 years.
10 years? So the right-of-way is one of the initial steps
Yes,
prior
the
to-
intent is to begin the right-of-way phase when we begin the design phase. And our desire would be to environmentally clear this entire project, showing all the wetland, all the right-of-way impacts, all that, in the environmental assessment. Once that's approved,
Okay.
we can move forward into design, and the intent would be to start right-of-way acquisition then for the entire project, as we move forward.
And you guys have already ruled out Keystone widening as a potential alternative due to just a severe impact to the right-of-way.
Actually, all the way down to Cass, all the homes along there
Would all have to be gone.
would all be taken. So we ruled that out in the PAL.
Okay. That's an important note to make.
And during this process, part of what happens is you identify the parcels of property that have to be included in the project.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. There are 14 or 15 relocations, total takes, so to speak.
And on the roundabout on 31,
Yes, sir.
we are actually shutting off McRae Hill on the north and making it all go into the roundabout, correct?
Yeah, we're moving the connection to the roundabout. That's correct.
I just want to add a point about the Keystone. There might be a couple structures that don't get, the structure itself is in the way. But we also recognize that if you have a home, and if the septic field happens to be within what we have to take, if you take a septic field to a house, you've taken the house. So maybe the house could survive, but you're not going to want to live in it if you don't have a septic field.
He's talking about what Alyssa's question
Right.
was,
Yeah.
down south of Hammond Road, yes.
I think that that's one of the more important things to kind of get out there too, is just reiterating that these alternatives have been looked at and looked at again and again and have reasonings as to why. And the Keystone widening is a right-of-way issue. I know that there's also issue for parallel runoff of contamination into the river and things like that. I realize that there's environmental reasons why Keystone is not a viable alternative. And then I think probably the most important thing I heard today, no offense to you because it was from Todd, but Airport Road does not provide resiliency.
Yeah, that
So
is
I think
one of the
that that's
biggest-
a critical thing to talk about is why these alternatives, I think all of us know why this location works, albeit with caveats, as you know. But these alternatives that I keep hearing mentioned over and over have been studied and studied to death, and it shows that there's these significant reasons why widening a keystone and use of South Airport Road are not viable alternatives to the east-west mobility issue.
Absolutely.
And I want to add something about South Airport a little bit more. I forgot to mention it while I was doing my formal presentation. So South Airport is still considered an alternative that we are looking at as part of this environmental assessment. However, you think about the right-of-way that the Road Commission currently owns along South Airport, and it is irregular in width. We've identified a couple locations where you literally just have from back of curb to back of curb, and everything else is in easements. Well, that's like 60, 65 foot. To do a 4-lane boulevard that would have a wide enough median that you can deal with trucks, because it's all commercial through there, you're talking about needing a right-of-way of 180 feet. And if you only got 60 foot, that means you're buying another 120. And we looked at whether it was possible to try to thread the needle, but then you're starting to impact both sides. And when you start looking at the value of impacting both sides, it was actually easier to shift the road entirely one direction or the other, but that means you're wiping out every single business for the whole corridor. So it's formally still part of the process. We are going to evaluate it, but we're going to document all that because I don't think Garfield Township wants to lose half an entire road's worth of commercial properties. So,
And I don't think the business owners want to.
well, there would be compensation due, without a doubt, but yeah.
Yeah. You still got to build it somewhere else.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions?
No, he answered my question.
The cost of, I've listened to people talk about the South Airport Road alternative, and they didn't like the number of our most friendly valley crossing. But when you consider the reconstruction cost of South Airport Road, along with
Right-of-way impacts.
the right-of-way impact, those, based on current valuations, I believe that it could be, it will make the crossing we've picked not seem that the cost objectionable, because the cost of ripping through South Airport and making it handle the traffic seems like it's going to be big enough and wide enough. I hadn't heard 180 feet before. I had heard somebody talk about doubling the width, which maybe was 60 to the 120. But when you talk about putting a truck in there, Steve, what that would do, and how wide that it would be necessary to actually function.
Yeah.
The 180 feet for a 4-lane boulevard.
Right,
You need
right, I
turning
understand. But I'm saying, so I had
Yeah.
heard 120 before, and if it really I don't
That's
know
narrow,
much about
that's
traffic
narrow.
design. When you stretch it out to that, it means the property acquisition costs are, not only does it take out all the business, the cost is gonna be really extreme.
Yeah,
And again-
and actually, the 180 is considered narrow, because if this was an MDOT route, or some of the counties that do, really do boulevards, they start at 200, is it 205 or
203.
203? They start at 203 foot right away. So we're thinking, okay, less green belt. The 203 gives you the option of spreading the roads as much as possible, so that someday, if you ever needed to, you could take a 4-lane and make it a 6-lane. But 180 is considered the smallest footprint you can get if you're dealing with a lot of trucks. If this was purely residential, you can get narrower than that because you have hardly any trucks, and you can have special locations just for the trucks to turn.
Not that case here. And again, as Alyssa said, the resiliency issue, even if you made South Airport Road with all the impacts that you end up with, you don't provide resiliency in the corridor, and that's one of the biggest items in our purpose and need. So.
If you were to remove the South Airport Road Bridge, the culvert bridge as it is, and change it to a span bridge, that would increase your resiliency ability for that road, because isn't the most potential emergency we would face would be the failure of the culvert bridge, but the cost would be exorbitant on top of the property acquisition to widen the road
You can't
leading
just-
to the bridge.
Unfortunately, you can't just replace those culverts with a bridge. It
Right.
has to go up because
Exactly.
any effort to upgrade that would require getting it out of the floodplain.
So all of the money in
there's-
The whole road-
acquisition
the whole
still
road
leaves
is
us
in
a
the
culvert
floodplain.
bridge.
What's that?
All the money in acquisition still leaves us a culvert bridge at the end of the day, which could fail, which is likely to fail.
And
at
resiliency doesn't just mean the culvert and the crossing at Logan's Landing. It doesn't just mean that. You have accidents that shut the road down all the time. And we've heard from the EMS people that they don't even go down that road with their lights on.
Right.
Anything that triggers a problem causes resiliency issues. It's
Okay.
not just the flood.
It's not just the flood
not.
impact or the emergency.
Any action that stops that road is, you're dead.
But when you talk about potential for South Airport Road as the alternative, the preferred alternative, say, that would require still leaving in the culvert bridge. You're really just talking about changes to the road itself, the road bed.
If you were going to use South Airport as the final alternative, all of South Airport within the floodplain would have to be raised
Right.
10 foot.
Which is the entire Logan's Landing.
Yeah.
Right.
Everything-
Access would be
everything,
very
The
difficult
whole way.
in the park.
And then, having raised the road the 10 foot, then you choose, you're gonna cut, culverts will go away almost automatically. Then you decide, are we putting culverts back, or are we just gonna put a bridge in?
Okay. Okay.
But the whole road, minimum 10 foot.
Okay, that's really helpful information, I think, to get out there too, so that people can really understand what the scope is of these alternatives that keep kind of resurfacing, yet we know are probably not viable alternatives.
The resiliency issue is bigger than I think a lot of people realize.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Any other questions?
Have you broken down the costs of your projection to these four?
Yeah, we have. It's not shown there,
Right.
but we have done that.
It's something you could present to us at some time.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Again, the costs are still early. We, at the preliminary engineering phase we do for the environmental assessment, the numbers are generally higher, and that's why that number that hit the papers years or months ago was so, it hit everybody so hard. It
Right.
had to be high.
Because you don't want to be under,
Absolutely not.
you want to be over when you're doing your estimate.
And there are so many things that we haven't looked at yet, and we don't look at until we get further into the process.
I think that part was conveniently left out of the article.
Well, they indicated it was road only, the bridge only.
Yeah, and it was not.
That was totally wrong.
Yeah, so not only was information left out, inaccurate information was put in, which had a severe impact for everyone that is involved in this project.
Correct.
So that was a shame. It would be nice to see a retraction article yet. I've
Well,
been
that's
waiting
kinda what
for
we're working
them
on,
for
you know.
20 years, yeah.
Thank you. Anything else?
Any additional questions from?
I just wanted to clarify the reason why we have an approximately 200 feet long bridge and approximately 70 feet high is because of the
You said 200, you meant 2,000.
2,000 feet long and 70 feet high, correct?
Yes, approximately.
That the reason for the design, that particular design, is because of the extensive environmental impact studies or assessment studies that you did, and to minimize the environmental impacts on the wetlands, correct?
Correct.
I mean,
One of the reasons that, Steve didn't mention, one of the reasons that the earlier project failed is they didn't do enough evaluation of the environmental impacts, and they were putting a lot of fill on top of wetlands and forested wetlands and stuff, and they didn't evaluate that well enough. That was another reason it was killed. And so, based on that, moving forward, we were encouraged and it made sense to keep the high bridge. That's pretty much
Right.
what we're doing.
So we are not, we are not, in other words, when it comes to pure costs, we are not comparing apples to apples.
Correct.
What the project was back, in its last iteration, is a very different project to the present.
Those are good
one.
words, Hyder. It is a very different project.
Right.
Much different.
Keep in mind that the old idea was you're crossing two railroad tracks at grade, and their thought was to try to push everything down into the valley as far as they
Right.
could to minimize the bridge. Here, if you look at this, you still have the railroads as a constraint, but on the Keystone side, it's now 25 foot higher. And if you look at that and recognize that Keystone Railroad and the Cass Railroad is just off, you really can't push it down very hard
We did look at
without getting grades that get so steep that you really want to have truck or vehicle
Right.
traffic trying to negotiate that in wintertime.
We did evaluate that on a brief basis, and you're looking at 8 degrees or plus, 8% or.
And for the board and others that are not familiar with what that looks like, that's Lafreniere Hill, except you're talking about going down 70 feet instead of going down 40 feet or 30 feet there. So you'd be talking about a Lafreniere Hill for the entire valley.
That wouldn't pass permit.
Yeah, and hitting a level playing field and then trying to go right back up that Lafreniere Hill.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that this is with only like a 1 acre total
That's what we're looking at this point.
take of wetlands.
Yeah, wetland.
Permanent
This is
impacts.
Permanent impact, so.
There are temporary impacts that we can,
And part of this, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, we do have some land for mitigation, but also we're going to go on to the riverbank where the.
Yeah. So there's still some areas in the valley that were never properly restored
And we're-
as
and
of
part of-
yet.
part of this is to restore
And part
those
of this
areas.
would be taking care of that and making the entire valley there more,
It's
the
where the
way
Saban-
it should
Where the
be.
Saban Dam came out.
see
Yeah.
those, you can see those berms on either side of near the river. Those are restricting the flow, the flooding of the river on high, and we.
And those are left over from a dam, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
I think
From
so.
a dam, okay.
And the idea is if we can take that out, it will reconnect
river would
the
widen.
river and the wetlands
Yeah.
Yes.
instead of being literally a dike.
So that's another part of this bridge, and we've never talked about it till today.
Not really.
We are going to continue to restore
I heard you mention that on
the
Wednesday.
river.
Good job.
And so that even through that area, it goes back to its proposed natural state of what it was prior. The other thing is, skipped my mind, I apologize, so.
Well, we're here all morning. Anything else?
No, I don't think so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Next, we're going to move into.
Well, Steve, you can probably hang out for just a second here. We got through that pretty quickly, so if you can give everybody a little bit of a background about how we calculate and what we deal with for road capacities before we get into the GIS maps, so that everyone understands the type of mitigations or solutions that exist for congestion depending on where we are and what the actual problems are.
Yeah, I'm going to talk in general terms to start, try to introduce a couple concepts, and then we'll get into more specifics. The Road Commission, you folks, you already have a process to try to identify projects that need to be done, trying to fit them into a priority list to figure out, what goes first, how does that fit your funding, what can we accomplish now, what we have to save up for to do later, that sort of thing. It's a very common occurrence with all road agencies. Everybody has to deal with this. What road agencies tend to do, which they should, is look at both safety and mobility and recognize that they're two sides of the same coin. Because if you don't have a particularly safe location, the crashes contribute as much to congestion as any kind of laneage deficiency. And it's generally true that as you improve safety, you're improving capacity, and vice versa. So with that kind of as a mental state, what you're doing, like other road commissions, you've got what's called a heat map, where you can map all the crashes in the county, and it helps kind of jump out, here's some of the problem locations. Some of them are on county roads, some of them actually are on trunk line, but as far as the general public's concerned, they don't care who owns the road. They just know that there's problems. And a more formalized process would be always and regularly checking the crash data to see that locations consistently show up, recognizing that sometimes crashes take the appearance of being totally random events. I was a city traffic engineer for Rochester Hills, Michigan for a decade, and I would track crashes literally every single year. And it was amazing how certain locations would jump way up one year, but then drop back down. So to smooth the data, I was looking at not a single year, but like a 3-year moving average to try to get the noise out of the data. And you have the tools to be able to do this, so that's all great. Then you start looking at just the capacity side, which is the other part of why you would have congestion. And capacity is actually related to the number of travel lanes you have, with an important proviso. Logically, obviously, a 2-lane road is going to be able to carry more vehicles than a 4-lane. 4-lane can carry more than a 6-lane. It's not a straight line. Just because you went from 2 to 4 doesn't mean you can double. It's close, but not quite. And then the other piece to the capacity puzzle is how many driveways or side streets, and then you have all the turning moments. Have you tried to take the step to isolate the turn movements so they're out of the way of the traffic that's trying to go through? And that's why nowadays you see very, very few 4-lane roads built. You usually want to go to 5 lanes so you have that center lane for left turns. And then you can add a right turn for a driveway or a side street if there's a lot of that movement. There were a lot of 4-lane roads that were built, and it was only partly because of the capacity, but it was also partly as a way of, okay, I got all these left turns, and they can get around by going to the curb lane when somebody stops. Hopefully they signaled the left turn, usually they didn't. And that way you could kind of keep everybody moving. But if it really didn't need 4 through lanes, that's why so many agencies are doing a road diet and taking it down to 3, so that they have that center left turn lane to get those turns out of the way, and 1 unimpeded through lane is more than enough. So 2 lanes of roads are perfectly fine. Once you start seeing a lot of turning movements, going to a 3-lane makes sense. And then from there, it's usually multiples, 3, 5. There are 7-lane roads down in the Detroit metro area. Gratiot is one example. And if you start seeing a lot of volume and a lot of conflicts associated with left turns, sometimes even a single left turn lane isn't enough, like at a major intersection. And that's why occasionally you see double lefts being put in. The thing about signalized intersections is the crossroads are trying to share a limited amount of real estate, and that's what the signal's all about. I'm going to give you 50 seconds and you're only going to get 30 seconds. So at some point in time, there's so much trying to use that limited pavement, you can't give a movement more green time without stealing away from some other movement that needs it just as badly. So if you can't give green time, you start giving lanes. And that's why even like a 3-lane road sometimes will widen to 5 lanes, but then go back to 3 once you've passed that major intersection signalized. And with all that said, that's one of the reasons you might also want to start looking at boulevarded roads, because the Michigan-style boulevard gets rid of all the left turns at the major intersection and pushes them to crossovers. We are right now, as part of the environmental assessment, looking at South Airport. And what our modeling is showing, which is based also on what our practical experience is that if you did not want to do a divided road on South Airport, you're going to need a 7-lane road with double Fs at select locations. On the other hand, you get rid of all the left turns and relegate them to crossovers, you only need a 4-lane boulevard. So a 7-lane is 3 travel lanes, undivided, but only 2 in each direction with the boulevard. And they have almost the exact same capacity. And the boulevard gets rid of head-ons, same direction side swipes, gets rid of a lot of the broadside right angles, that sort of thing. So a boulevard has a much safer cross-section than an undivided road. So as the Road Commission's starting to look at your capacity and congestion issues, it's going to be, okay, it's not just the volume, it's how many vehicles of that volume are sharing how many travel lanes in each direction. And in the jargon, we call that a volume to capacity ratio. The idea is that by definition, a 2-lane road has a certain capacity associated with it. A 4-lane or a 5-lane has a larger number. If you had a road carrying 25,000 a day over an entire 24-hour period, average workday, 25,000, a 2-lane road would be severely congested. A 5-lane road, it's like in its midlife. I mean, it's no big deal. I mean, you start pushing 5-lane roads up to about 25, 30, 35,000, then they start to struggle. And it becomes a question of what's happening on the crossroads in terms of, how much green time can you give everybody. So as you move forward and you want to start looking at how to prioritize, you're going to be looking at having somebody take a look and saying, okay, a generic 2-lane road has this capacity, a 3-lane has that, a little bit more because you've gotten rid of the left turns. Then a 4, left turns start being problematic. Then a 5, you'll have a capacity number associated with each type of roadway. And then you start looking at the volumes on those types of roadways, reduce it to a number, a volume to capacity number. And the closer you get to 1, the more congested you are. So it's just a tool to help you recognize and prioritize the roads that are congested as it relates to the number of lanes that they currently have. The last thing you need to kind of be aware of is that regardless of the kind of road it is, how many lanes it has, they face their greatest stress at intersections where the crossroad is important enough, has enough traffic on its own right to be signalized. Or even a roundabout, doesn't matter, same concept. Once you start seeing intersections fail, that's when the rest of the road starts seeing these backups. And the strategy of many road agencies is, it's called linked node. If you take care of the node, the intersection first, you can get away with not fixing the link for a longer time. Because if a node fails, that's when the link is likely going to fail. So if you can take care of the nodes first, you don't eliminate, but you can greatly delay the need to fill in the gaps between the intersections, so to speak. And now talking in that same vein as regards to roundabouts, our experience is that strategically located roundabouts are even better at delaying the inevitable widening of roads compared to putting in signals. Because roundabouts do a better job of processing traffic than a signal does, unless you go to the really high tech. And I suppose in a way you can say that you've done that. You've installed Scoot. It's an adaptive system. The idea is that it's detecting traffic, relating that to capacity, and saying, okay, yeah, I can steal a couple seconds from this movement and give it to that movement. And as an adaptive system, it's always looking at the different traffic patterns that are changing. But there will come a point in time where everything is congested and it can no longer rob Peter to pay Paul. So that's the point. How long can you get away with that before, I'm sorry, we just got to look at widening these roads? So those are the kind of the conceptual tools. You always look at safety. You're going to be looking at capacity as it relates to the volume. And then those then will be the touchstones for you starting to put your priority list together. And another reason that you want to look at safety as well as capacity is that you're going to want to try, if you can, leveraging other people's money. And there might be a really good intersection improvement that you'd love to do, but you can't, it doesn't score well enough in the criteria that the funding agencies have, just because it's a capacity job. But if you can demonstrate the safety side, maybe you get safety monies to fix it instead. If you know safety and congestion for your system, it gives you the most latitude in going after funding to help you build what you need to build.
Okay.
Does that help?
That does. Is there any questions? I just have one comment on our Scoot system. We get a lot of complaints at the 6 a.m. hour for the general public. That's when the Scoot system begins to boot itself back up for the day. That's the best way I can describe it. And so,
As they're going from individual signals, the Scoot system takes over to start timing it for the corridor movement. And so occasionally people will get stuck at a signal, waiting for it as it falls into the queue, so that everything is based on that 120-second maximum intervals. And so, yes, there are times that people will get caught at a light that will go red, and it may be
It's setting.
preliminary red, but it's setting itself up for the rest of
that's
the
kind of a
traffic
public
throughout the
announcement
day.
on that one, so people understand what's going on there.
Yeah, I'm used to Oakland County. I used to work for Oakland County Road Commission a long time ago. Rochester Hills, my old town, that was in Rochester Hills, so I'm very familiar with that. They use a different adaptive system called SCATS, but it's the same thing, different product, that's all. And they also used to let the signals kind of run free, but then they said, okay, as of this time of day, we're going to start it and slave everything. It's a system now. And those complaints, they said, oh, we're just going to run it all the time,
Yeah.
24 hours a day. It's just simpler.
So, is there any other questions? I think a 15-minute break would probably be good. There's coffee and refreshments, and you need to use the restroom. So why don't we go at ease for about 10, 15 minutes here. We'll come back at 9:30. Everybody can take a quick break if that's okay.
Sounds good, thanks. I'll grab some napkins.
I forgot my chapstick in my car, so it's very critical to go get my chapstick.
I gotta use the restroom.
Hold up the meeting.
So this is specifically for Joe.
It's not. Yeah, it's not.
Did we lose, we just lost John?
I know, that's what I was like. I think he only came for the bridge, maybe, I don't know.
The thing I lost in my head was, we're doing this project.
Totally understand.
30 inch.
And I would like
I don't know
to,
if you want to mention maps, just so they can check them out. Whether
I will.
I really would like a cost estimate of this South Airport.
Okay, also, if anybody's interested, in the back, we have some maps up that show some of our higher congestion areas. Larry's going to be back in that area.
That's what we want you to do. Buy those businesses, widen South Airport.
Well, remember at that.
Well, but why
Last
isn't that
meeting.
a that, why is, okay, you say this is so expensive. The alternative you want is far more expensive.
Because that guy, remember that guy, Tim Lodge, the former, I think they turned off.
No.
All right, I'm gonna come. You better go to the bathroom.
So now we're gonna actual numbers.
Showing some actual, and then start talking about how we're going to address some of these. From what I understand, it's going to talk
Well, yeah, you don't want Well, they're going to go ahead and because you can't squish them on their properties anymore.
That's like
Most street.
It's like,
But the cost of that is not, it's not a great alternative because of the cost. I think we need a number on the cost.
and that's what part of the whole. The other issue with it is it's not just today's cost. You're now taking that out of, in some instances, ever being another teacher. So that's a deduction in long-range tax revenue.
To the school system and everybody else who has their hand out, the library and Beta,
You name it.
everybody, we take those off the rolls. It's a complex.
and you're talking about infrastructure. Where they're gonna go?
Yeah, well, business park, and or go east that way past Township, whatever.
You have to extend sewer connections, water connections, I mean, you're not gonna put all those on septic.
No, you're not. It's got all kinds of parts that are not gonna work smoothly together. Right, well, the facts don't matter.
Right, right, those details don't matter.
Right. Yeah, it's just awful. So how did we manage to get your home? I saw you were chewing.
Sorry,
It's gonna be like 8. But
All right. Boggles my mind
Everyone can buy all year round, There's a lot of comments. I mean, mostly. However it works between Rachel and you, go for it.
I have to make, like, when we come back and decide, to be made yet. So give me a few minutes.
Hence, we have 27 chickens, yeah. 27 chickens, getting twins a day.
Yeah, you can sit anywhere you want. You can see it back this way too.
The other girls are old. Oh, yeah.
I've actually, no, there's more, I've seen people walk in that I don't
Yeah, there's plugs.
There's
Plugs on it. I had television.
It's water?
I didn't want to interrupt you. Yeah. They go.
My sticky hands washed. Dana, I mean, I didn't get a extra napkin, and so it's like I ate it, and they were sticking to my feet, and the last thing I want to do is go, in front of the whole audience, so I stopped eating it. Got done.
If we can move back towards our seats, we're going to get started.
Are you gonna put up it's my favorite map, the one with all the colors?
Yes. He went to the restroom.
Well, I'll get you access to it.
It's a great map, I really love it. I wanted to share it with my subdivision, like, Facebook page.
He went to the restroom there.
I love maps.
These are not those kind of maps.
They're not my travel maps.
Yeah, exactly.
I love, like, data and maps, like, I really do. Yeah. Oh my God. I
paid for them. We paid for them.
I drove the kids to Detroit, and this map was in the car.
Oh.
I put it in the car, and they're like, "What's this?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
It's a map.
"It's a map."
All right, if we can take our seats, we're going to start back up again.
Exactly. Honestly, I don't know that I can
Propel your power.
with my eyesight, even with my phone to stop.
So let's get back in order here. We're going to do a few cleanups here from this morning's presentation. One of the things I was going to mention there at the end is that while we're building this bridge, we're also going to be working with Public Works and other folks to help with their reliability and redundancy of services to the citizens here. So it's more than just a bridge that's going to happen when we come across that crossing. And there was a few other things that we were going to clarify.
So one of the things that did get kind of skipped over a little bit here with this corridor improvement, we had a traffic forecast model built, which I think Steve can talk a little bit more about, but this project, if the bridge goes in, is going to handle over 20,000 cars a day as soon as it's built. And it's going to take 37% of the traffic off of Airport. But it's not only just Airport. It's going to reduce traffic for the rest of the east-west corridors throughout the community. And one of the biggest impacts is going to be up on the parkway. Because right now, trucks coming, if they're coming from Manistee going to Charlevoix, they're forced to go up to the parkway. When you build this type of a structure that can handle it, and we build it successfully so that the truck traffic can come off the parkway and take that Hammond-Hartman crossing and then move all the way down Hammond Road and out to the US 31 east of town, that then presents an availability of some options for what could happen on US 31 because your truck traffic has been so significantly reduced. And that, then at that point, at some point, depending on how things work, there's always the possibility that MDOT would be interested in potentially saying, hey, why don't we just move US 31 completely down there?
Or the truck traffic.
Or at least the truck traffic to start, for sure. But, at some point, they say, hey, let's talk and let's figure out what are we going to do? Because that whole waterfront area now, for anybody who's tried to cross there, it's like playing Frogger, trying to get across that section of US 31, because even at the intersections that are controlled with all the trucks, the visibility is blocked by so much that people don't see people trying to cross the road, and it's a dangerous section.
That new corridor is pretty much a commercial corridor, so.
Yeah.
So, in the future. Just some clarifications from this morning. Now we're going to go into some actual numbers of what's happening on the infrastructure within the county.
Okay.
And are you going to run this, or Larry?
Larry's going to start
I think we're going to have
covering.
Larry starting this, and he's going to talk about actual numbers of vehicles on roads per day.
Yeah, and so everyone knows, this is predominantly MDOT collected data from us, from them, and some other data sources that they have that they are able to generate these maps for us. So,
Yeah, most of this data, obviously this data is from MDOT, but there are some other things and data gathering that we're doing right now. We do have some traffic counts that we're doing in-house, and we've kind of incorporated those. Also with
microphone.
our GIS, we have incorporated the 2 lanes, 3 lanes, 4 lanes. So we've mapped those out to try to get it better, like Steve was talking about. If we want to have a 2-lane, what's the max capacity we want on that lane, so we can start picking out corridors that we want to work on, or corridors that we want to attack. So right now, it's just this is a map with land use behind it, so it's parcel data from the county, and it just has simple land use behind it: residential, agricultural, industrial, commercial. And the reason we put that on there is just because of, we want to incorporate some of the townships, their master plans, and just make sure that we're covering all the bases. The green area that kind of is wrapped around, that is the NFC, or I'm sorry, it's the adjusted census urban boundary. So everything inside of that is it's a different funding mechanism, and right now they're trying to figure out how to expand that a little bit more and how to stretch that out. And once the MPO happens, different funding will happen inside of those boundaries.
Right. So that will end up being the MPO's active boundaries for where road projects are going to be focused.
Yep, which is still under review right now. Some of the layers we put together here, this is just really broad from MDOT, and this is we just put it on the map, and it's showing the different capacities for these different locations. We have this, what you're looking at right now is not broken down by lane. It's just showing the whole system in its entirety. So you're going to see state trunk lines, you're going to see non-state trunk lines, and the differences between a couple of these corridors. The big one, obviously, you can see that right in the center here is South Airport. That's running at 37,000. So that's a large amount of traffic. And if you look over to the left here, this is 31. They have it calculated at 24, just under 25,000. So we know that South Airport is definitely carrying quite a bit of traffic on that road. That is kind of that bottleneck. So what we did was took that data, and then we created a couple different layers that will show us the 2 lanes. So these are all the 2 lanes that are in our system that, and I'm not trying to just zoom in on Traverse City, but there is a lot of the traffic that is kind of moving through that system. But you can see the different townships and everything. So the primary 2 lanes and the local 2 lanes, again, we have a system of primary network. We have about 260 miles of that. And then we have our local network. And that's how we utilize and prioritize our projects. Most of them are right now going to our primary network. And that is the majority of our projects we're focusing on now. With the new policy, though, we do have, and I'll just flop over to this other map here, and it shows our different networks. This is, we have the 260 miles of primary, and I'll just zoom in here a little bit. Forgive me if I go too fast. Sometimes I get a little click happy. But the purple is in that 260, that's our primary network. A lot of we're trying to get that road network up to 80% good fair, or good or fair for the MDOT Payzer ratings. And then we have our local network with our subdivisions, seasonals, and locals. The new policy that we brought in was to bring in the through roads, so we can start focusing on those 120 miles of through roads, which are scattered throughout the county, throughout the individual townships.
Okay, real quick, Larry. So if for anybody who's not familiar with it, Payzer is a way to collect what the condition of the roads are, and there's a very prescribed way of doing it. The state requires people to be trained on it so that it's consistent across counties and across years as we collect this data. So we have many years of this Payzer data that tells us where our road conditions started when this began and all the way up till current day. So it's a windshield survey. We drive the roads, we make sure that we are agreeing what the condition of those roads are, and that helps guide our asset management plan, which is really what we're talking about here, is adding a new layer to our asset management plan that involves congestion and safety.
And I just wanted to make that clear, because that's how we do what we do right now, is we use our asset management plan. Incorporating our congestion and everything, that is something that I think we've done in the past a little, but I really think that that will help us start to dial in some of our road projects. So right now, we're looking at, again, the 2-lane roads over 5,000. You can start to see some of these roads that you're probably pretty familiar with. This is, South Garfield heading down to Kingsley. You can start to see some of that heavier traffic. You can start to see Keystone is carrying quite a bit, like 10,000. Cass is in that 7,000 area. If we look over into some other townships, we can see this one is 4 mile. And that's just over, that's 6,500. So we're just trying to dial this in so that we can start making some sense of our system. And with GIS and different layers, we can start to illustrate some of these locations. North Long Lake Road. We also, inside of our asset management plan, we're trying to incorporate what is close by. So if we have a hospital, if we have a school, if we have anything like that, that priority for that particular project rises to the top. And as I move through, so I'm going to look at 2-lane roads over 10. So our 2-lane roads, again, over 10 is that Keystone to the Chums Corner area, that that section that goes up to the Hammond Road, obviously. Now, it does show our South Airport Road here. It's taking that into consideration because it is a 2-lane. It's a 2-lane, but it's carrying that amount of traffic. It's actually two directions, but it shows up on our GIS and our.
Can you scroll back out again?
Sure.
The 18,001 is where we're doing the improvement in that intersection right now, correct?
Where's the 18,000?
18,152?
Oh, right.
That is the other side of Hood Lake.
Yeah.
So that is,
Oh, yes.
so,
Yep.
just so everybody's got a reference, that's where we're doing the,
The new,
Widening and the
Change.
added turn lanes.
correct.
and that's the reason why, right there.
Right, because that's your volume.
I don't know if there's any in particular that you guys want to take a look at, but you can kind of see
I can't
the
remember, do
theme
we have
here.
the crash areas?
We do, yes. So if we bring in crash, give me a second here. And this is pretty much the heat map that we have over there on the wall. I'll take out the parcels and you can start to see. Again, if you have more traffic, you're probably going to have more crashes.
Larry, could you look at County Road 633 just for a number?
Sure. Let's see. Let me get the 2-lane back in. That is not showing. Let me get, there we go. That's, all right. So right here's our ground. This is our 633. It's looking at just over, 3,500. 633, and then after Buckley there, it increases to 7,500 is the data that they have.
Which stretch of 633 is that?
Well, it's not, actually, this is not 633. This is coming into
Yeah.
37.
37.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we look at capacity increases, we take these numbers. I want the general public to understand how we do this. We take these numbers, and what do we do with them?
We need to know that how many lanes, and we need to know, as Steve was talking about, like drive access, intersection access, and we look at those accidents too. And if we find intersections on these high volumes that need to have something done as far as a safety adjustment because of the number of crashes, and those crashes are what years, I'm sorry, Larry?
We have 2017 to 2022.
Yeah, so we look at that, and then you have to determine, what your best solution is based on what can be addressed by a capacity issue. And as Steve was saying, it could end up meaning dual left turn lanes. It could end up meaning widening at intersections, potentially a roundabout. There's a lot of potential solutions depending on what the specific criteria is that we're trying to address. And it's based on the number of lanes versus the volumes and traffic crash reporting also. So we have all that data that we need to look at before we can figure out what the priority of that road should be.
So you said the crash data is from 2017 to 2020?
Two.
222. So when you analyze that crash data, what's the criteria that you're using to prioritize? How many crashes, so for example, have to occur?
Let's have Steve kind of give us a little bit better address on that. He's been doing this long enough. He knows all the criteria for sure.
Okay. There's lots of different ways of looking at crash data. And the idea is that you have to recognize the inherent bias that the data represents. For example, you could just look at crash numbers, crashes per year. Okay? Simple, very simple. On the other hand, if you then rank order them from the highest crashes to the lowest by location, you're going to find that it tends that the highest crash locations are also the busiest roads, highest volumes. There's a bias when you're just using what's called frequency, the frequency of crashes, that it biases toward high volumes. On the other hand, what you could do is make a calculation of crashes per vehicle miles of travel, if it's a road segment, or crashes per vehicles entering an intersection for those, and that's called a rate. And at that point, it kind of equalizes the whole idea of, busy roads have more crashes. On the other hand, it has its own bias. And I'll give you an example. Again, I was a city traffic engineer for Rochester Hills. I looked at intersections and road segments, and there was one road segment in town that always had one crash a year. Just one. Wintertime. Gravel road, somebody always slid off and went into a ditch. One crash a year. It was the highest rated crash rate segment because it only had 100 vehicles a day on it. So if you have an unusually small number of vehicles, even a handful of crashes make it look disproportionate. So you could look at it by frequency, you could look at it by rate. There's another way to look at it, and that's by severity. You don't really want to care that much about volumes. You don't really want to care that much about rates. You want to look at the crashes that cause fatal or severe injury. And in the jargon, a fatal is coded on the crash form as a K, and a severe injury, the kind that get an ambulance, take them to the hospital, that's considered a so-called A injury. So some road agencies say we only are going to care about K and A's, and we're going to rank everything by that. Well, now you're ignoring a lot of minor injuries or an absolute ton of property damage only. So there's yet another way to look at it where you say, well, a fatal is far more important than an A, which is still more important than a so-called B injury, which is a non-incapacitating injury. And then there's a C, which is just a complaint of injury. Then you have an O, which is property damage only. And what we're going to do is we're going to put weights on each type of crash. A lot of times a fatal will be considered a 10, where a property damage only is considered a 1, and then you just weight them all. And now you're looking at a crash frequency, but with the weight of severity built in. Then you can say, okay, that's nice. Now let's also bring in the rate values for volumes. So there's just a ton of different ways of slicing and dicing, and it's just a question of how complicated you want to make it for yourself. Because every time you look at a different way, it generates this different kind of a list. What I personally did, because my town, I looked at my town and saw that I was at least average, if not below average, when it came to severity. I said, that's great, good for us. But what I want is, I want to look at the roads that are above average for frequency and above average for rate. Now I have a much smaller list that I can have, and that's when you can dive in and say, okay, I'm going to take a look at this intersection or that road segment. What actually is happening? Can I identify mitigations that I can use to build something to make it all better? So again, there's lots of different ways. Most people just start with frequency because that's the easiest. And as long as you just recognize that it has that bias toward high volume locations, that's fine. It's just that when you want to get a more responsive project selection process, then you want to look at something more than just frequency. And then you take like a policy decision, are we going to look at rate or severity? And if so, how? How we want to cook that into the equations.
Are there your explanation suggests that there are hybrids form approaches as well. So could a hybrid form be frequency, severity based upon the weighted scale
Yep.
and rate?
Yes.
I mean, is that too complicated, or is that sufficiently simple enough to address the issue?
Okay, the sheer crashes, you get that in the crash reporting through the Michigan State Police. You got that in the bag. Severity, that's just part of the crash reporting, that's in the bag. Once you want to look at rate, now you have to look at volumes, and you can't really, you can, but you would prefer not to rely on really old counts. So if you want to look at rate, then you have to have a relatively robust system of counting to make sure that the counts are up to date, and you're not comparing this road with the count that was taken last year to this other road where the count is 8 years old. You know, you want to have them all relatively close to each other, and the rule of thumb in my business is counts within 3 years. Once you get to 4 or 5 years, it's getting old. And you can easily identify what that's all about. What happened in 2020? Pandemic. I mean, travel all over the country changed radically because of the pandemic. And what we've seen is that post-pandemic, there's a lot of places that had a lot of volume and it dropped and it's come back, but not all the way back. So again, you start relying on old counts, they might not be representative of what's actually happening out on your system. So yes, you can do hybrids, but anything that's going to involve a calculation of a vehicle crash per number of vehicles, you want to have a really good counting program.
Steve, I would also like to clarify too, you know, this isn't every accident. There are certain accidents that cannot be addressed by changing a road configuration. Deer accidents up here are incredibly prevalent. No matter what we do, deer are going to jump out. So that type of thing we don't talk about. And if people are, you know, looking and you have intoxicated drivers causing accidents, that's not really something you can engineer for. So it's a subset of the accidents that we're actually looking at to begin with as we start comparing these numbers.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But usually you start with the first cut where you're looking at everything. Then as you get more sophisticated, yes, you can start excluding the animal crashes. You want to be a little bit careful about the intoxication issues, because there are a couple of build mitigations, and you're starting to see them all over. Centerline rumble strips, edgeline rumble strips. There's things you can do that it doesn't get rid of the idiot that drank and drove, but it's more than just them. It's also people that maybe are on medications to make them sleepy, or maybe you're some idiot that lives south of here, but I have a place at Northport and I'm coming up at midnight and I'm really tired. You know, so that there are some engineering measures that you can build into your road system. They're not panaceas, but they can be considered. But yeah, you start, you know, it's looking at the global, and then you can start slicing and dicing your way down to really specific. Then you become aware of the funding application criteria, and there's a lot of safety money out there, but you have to justify your application by showing that you have fatal and incapacitating crashes. And then it's not just, well, we had a couple of people that got killed. What are you proposing that will actually resolve that issue? So, again, all of this plays into giving you the tool set to figure out how to operate your system, and if you want to make improvements, where the priority should be, and how, understanding all this, you can find outside money to make it all a reality.
And I appreciate you saying that, because I want the general public to understand, like, next spring when we do Potter and Garfield, this is the exact model that we followed to choose that particular intersection to make a roundabout at. So sometimes the public doesn't understand why we do things in certain ways. So that's why I appreciate you being very specific on how we decide that that's actually the intersection that's up next.
Yeah.
There are more to come, but that's ranks the highest on our list.
You had earlier talked about the interconnection between safety and capacity. Essentially, from how I understood your presentation was that you look at it from a safety standpoint, and that's why we are talking about crashes, and then determine if the remedies are to add a turn lane, additional turn lane, and or increased capacity. But I want to be clear that when we are talking about, as a road agency, about increasing capacity on certain corridors, that it's not exclusively based upon crash data or safety, that capacity can also be the sheer volume of traffic, regardless of if the crash data or that component, safety component, is not present.
If I gave that impression, and my apologies.
No, it's not. I want to be clear. Yeah.
There is a interrelationship between safety and mobility that cannot be avoided, but it's never only one or only the other.
Right.
And not always, but a lot of times, things that you do to improve crashes, improve safety, will improve mobility. Things you do to improve mobility will improve safety. Again, there's a relationship between them, but it's never a one or the other, all or none.
Thank you.
And when we're talking about, we have any other questions? Because we might get into another subject here as I make my next comment.
Oh, about traffic, you
What's
mean
going on
about
so
traffic
far, the
crashes?
safety and the.
Oh.
Because when the board discusses things like capacity, if we take a look over here at the Beitner, Keystone, Cass area, you can see how Cass and River go on to Keystone, which makes the Beitner Hill tremendously busy. So when we look at capacity, is there an ability to punch Cass Road through on the other side of the river that would allow us to hook into Beitner, but it would also allow us to hook into Rennie School Road and give another pressure point relief onto that system? That is, when I get into capacity, that is what I think about we should be looking at with capacity increases. Because we wind up getting what, 20,000 coming up that hill? 17, 18,000?
17, yeah, 18,000.
So can I put another road in further down where there's already a light on the west side of the river by hooking in Cass Road to relieve that pressure point at Chumps Corners? Those, for the general public, those are the things we discuss behind, when we're up here looking at things.
Yeah,
As well as, can I take Zimmerman Road further over and hook it into Bugай Road into the other county so that we can move traffic around that way versus going into the city and then coming back out again? Those are the capacity increases that this board is beginning to look at.
Yeah, now, let's deal with the second point first. It wasn't formally our charge to look at that as part of the Pell for the Boardman River crossing, but we noted that, in effect, a good east-west connector using Hartman-Hammond would be the start of what's in the jargon called a ring and spoke, or a wagon wheel. And the idea is that there are a lot of people want to get into Traverse City. It's a great place to recreate. It's a great place to have jobs, retail, all that sort of stuff. It's the hub, the economic engine of the region. And the idea of a hub and spoke is that you use Hartman-Hammond and either 3 or 4 mile as a way of circulating traffic around for them to find the spot that makes the most sense for them to dive into the city to get to a job or school or whatever. And in that same context, continuing it to the west and then to the north makes sense, and tying it into Leelanau County. In the meetings that we had for both the East-West Corridor Study and the Pell, Leelanau expressed an interest in that. And you're about to have a wonderful tool with the formation of this Metropolitan Planning Organization to start that kind of a planning process, to look at how to make it not just suited to the needs of Grand Traverse County, but also match and amplify the desires of your neighbors. So, great. And there's lots of different ways to make that connection. There's just doodling, I came up with about 7 different alternatives. And I'll share them with the Road Commission.
Okay. On the east side, did you also model out taking Hammond, which turns into Supply, into the Williamsburg area? So that would wrap around on the other side?
We did not. But on the other hand, related to your first point about Cass, as part of the Pell, that was one of the alternatives, starting at Cass and Keystone, using that bridge, and then just keeping going to the west to get to 31. Possibly to like where McCrae Hill has its south intersection on top of the plateau. And what we found the problem there was, you have the elevation, the existing elevation of the bridge over the river, and then you have that railroad track. But that railroad track is so high compared to the elevation of the Cass Road Bridge that you'd have to have almost a 10% grade to get up and cross the railroad at grade. So we were thinking the only reasonable thing is to tunnel under the railroad, and that's another brand new bridge. And the railroad embankment is acting as an embankment, and because of that, it has created many, many acres of wetlands. And once you punch a road under the railroad, all those wetlands are going to drain. And I forgot how many acres would be impacted by trying to do something like that. So that was, and then you have conservation easement properties that get involved with that area. So that's one of the reasons that fell off the table. So that was in the Pell. In the East-West Corridor Study, though, we looked at, and I wish I remembered the names, it's, is Beitner about where the old Cass Dam, or the old Sabin Dam was? Is it Beitner?
Bermley.
Bermley.
No.
In Beitner is south, not Beitner, what is it?
The next one south is Hoke Road.
Hoke and River.
Hoke.
Oh, Coke, that's it, okay.
Cass, Hoke.
We looked at Coke going across and connecting to Rennie School.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, we did.
So we did look at that. And the thing is, it would make sense for the system, but not in terms of what you need in the next 20 years or so. It had a benefit, but it was a very, very small benefit to the existing network. And that's why the Hartman-Hammond was favored, because it had a more immediate impact on your network. And the traffic that would go on to the new Hartman-Hammond connection would be coming off of South Airport, and pretty much every east-west road all the way up to the water would be benefited, although to different degrees. You know, we looked at, if Hartman-Hammond got built, what's the impact of South Airport? What's the impact to 8th Street, to Front Street, to Grandview Parkway? And the airport saw the most dramatic improvement. The others were very minor compared to, but they were still improvements compared to not building anything. When we looked at the is it Koch or Coach?
Hoke.
Coke.
With an H.
Coach. Okay, you compare that Rennie School, it almost didn't move the needle at all on South Airport.
Okay.
Let alone
It was too far
going
south
north.
to move the needle on South Airport. Was too far south to move the needle on South
Exactly.
Airport.
Now, But that's based on what's happening today and forecast to happen in the next 20 years. You get to that, it's now 20 years down the road, you have additional development, not just in Garfield Township, but all of the other surrounding townships, then that might make a lot more sense. It wasn't that it wasn't a good idea, it's just, it was an idea whose time had not come.
So when we look at this model here, this thing right here, we get to the Beitner Hill, and it goes up to 18,000. Realistically, the only thing we can do in the short term is to maybe add a truck lane to help offset the amount of
You could, yes, a truck climbing lane.
truck
Yep.
climbing lane. I don't know about coming down, but going up, it would be logical for us to say, you know what, we're going to put a truck climb lane there so that the slower traffic can move to the side.
Mhm.
And that would increase the capacity, shall we say.
Yep.
Coming up that hill.
And we've made it apparent to MDOT, they didn't need it. They didn't need us telling us this. They are already aware of the fact that Chum's Corner, 31 at 37, it's already bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, they've already set it up for double Fs, and that's not enough.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the number 20 on 31, 24,000, and and I guess I'm thinking, okay, even with the Hartman-Hammond crossing, when that traffic comes out to 31, how is that? The pressure on 31 in that stretch, that's not going to get addressed.
Well,
right?
It is speculative, but based on my discussions with my modeling folks, this is what they think might happen. If we can get Hartman-Hammond built, get it out to 31 near McCrae Hill to the north, traffic, not a lot, but some traffic will move off of Beitner and Keystone and use that instead. So to the extent that traffic on Beitner drops in absolute numbers compared to where it is today, I think I mentioned it. You got capacity issues, you either gave them green time or more lanes to travel on. Traffic dropping on Keystone will give you the opportunity to steal green time away from Beitner and give it to the other movements.
Okay.
Not going to solve it,
Right.
but it helps
So the new east-west corridor will also help relieve that 18,000.
to a minor extent, yes.
So then if we go to the north, Larry, slide down there. Let's go up to behind the junior high there. Is that 10,000?
Junior
Does,
high, yep.
yeah, over in that area. Does the east-west corridor help change my 10,000 going up
Barnes Road.
Barnes Road? Thank you. I had a brief moment of,
Well, that's
or does it increase the pressure on there without punching Zimmerman through to Bugay to the next county?
To the extent that people start using this as a wheel and spoke, yes, it's going to increase pressure on that road. But again, with the MPO, you can immediately start the planning process of how to feel, or how to, what to consider in terms of extending the wheel part of that to the north and west. And again, just playing with it, I found a number of different alignments, including some that are greenfield roads, not existing roads. There's lots of variations implicit in this as a problem that need to be evaluated.
Bugay already was expanded for this purpose. If you're kind of in this rural Leelanau County area, 2-lane roads, and all of a sudden you're on a 5-lane wide, stretch going through a farm area. And that was in anticipation of the complete bypass that would take you from Acme Whitewater and go all the way up into Leelanau. I mean, that was discussed at the iteration of the Hartman-Hammond 20, 30, 40 years ago, was this idea of bringing that up. And Beitner's or Bugai's already widened for it. It's ready. It just needs to be connected. There's an extremely small piece missing, and that is Zimmerman Road actually extends right now. If you look at it, do you see that little road commission circle? It's for the plow trucks and school buses to be able to circle. That area from that circle to the Harris Road weird sharp turn is one parcel. It's one piece of property that's for sale right now. That's it. If they purchase that and the township has a requirement, say it's a PUD, of finishing that road, that's connected. However, there's utility easements there. I mean, there are above-ground utilities there, but there's a potential for that. But it's of no use, really, when it's all 2 lanes. Zimmerman is 2 lanes right now, which is difficult. The current extension of Zimmerman there, that's the Brookside Commons development and Lone Tree subdivision. That's a 2-lane road. And then, of course, Harris and all of that is a 2-lane road. So when I think of this discussion about capacity, that's kind of the things I think of is those tools that we have now to do, like, you know, like Bill said, or maybe it was you, that you're looking for 3 lanes or 5 lanes or 7, you're looking for those odd numbers. And if you look at these high capacity, high volume roads, they're predominantly 2 lanes and we all drive them. I think Long Lake Road is one of the most significant problems in our area in many different ways. But Long Lake is the direct cause of that bottleneck you see around the Zimmerman Barnes area, because a lot of people live in Long Lake Township and beyond, but they work in the city or Garfield or whatever. And we also have, of course, a significant thing, which is West Senior High right there. So when you add all of that together, anything we could do to relieve that area makes the most sense to me. Long Lake Road is 2 lanes. At 8 in the morning, it's as far as you can see.
At what level of traffic would you suggest we look at 3 lanes or 5 lanes or 4 lanes, or is there a is there a magic number or not?
There is, but I'm reluctant to use it because there's a bunch of assumptions behind them.
That makes sense.
And it's almost always good to have that center left. But whether it's 1 travel lane in each direction or 2 travel lanes in each direction, it's still a function of, well, how many driveways, how many crossroads, how major are they that you're going to look at signalizing or putting in roundabouts? All of that comes into play before you get to a magic cutoff.
The issue, part of the issue with North Long Lake, especially around the high school, is that Herkner intersection. I mean, we looked at it not that long ago, and one of the issues was we talked about reorienting some of the internal driveways within the high school, and TCAPS wasn't willing to go along with it.
Yeah,
so
they're not interested.
That is, to me, that is a big cause of that backup in the morning because of how that intersection is aligned. I don't know how. This is from just my personal observation, especially along the North Long Lake stretch. I don't know how valuable a center turn lane is there, to be honest with you, other than that high school, because there are not too many developments on either side where people are holding up traffic turning left. They're farmland.
It's just more traffic flow.
I know, but yeah, I mean, unless Gallagher Farms decides to sell their farm, I mean, okay, well, you know.
Yeah, there's lots of instances where 2-lane is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
It's just that when you start anticipating development, I mean, if you know that it's not going to develop, that's fine. But if you anticipate that someday it's going to develop and you have only a limited say in terms of how many intersections or side streets, then it's a question of prudence.
But I do agree on the Zimmerman part. I think that is the connection between the Leelanau Grand Traverse line to,
It's very small.
it's very, you have to, yeah, you have to go zigzag, or there's no direct connectors there. And Zimmerman itself is a well-traveled
Yeah,
road, and
yeah.
especially that traffic light at Zimmerman and North Long Lake Road. It's at a slope when you come to, and people, you know, especially if you're turning left from Zimmerman onto North Long Lake Road, that sometimes people come speeding up, and then they have to slam on their brakes because the
Yep,
traffic,
yep.
you know, the light is red.
They did change the slope of that, though. The road commission did several years ago when they redid Zimmerman. They actually made it less. Because
less,
that's my
yeah,
road, and like,
yeah.
I can't tell you, I could count weekly the number of people that slide into people at
Yeah,
intersections.
right.
So there was a significant safety improvement done on, at that light, but you're right, there could be more for sure. And I think we should also note the number of 16-year-old drivers around a senior high. Like,
Yeah.
that throws a loop into this that no engineer can fix, right?
You know, don't get me started when it comes to schools.
Yeah.
I've spent 30 years of my career fixing the mistakes of architects working with the schools where it looked pretty. Doesn't function, but it looked pretty. And then I have numerous school districts I worked with saying, well, you know, you got to change this. You know, why didn't you separate buses from parent drop off? You know, all that kind of stuff. So schools are a nightmare, almost always.
So, I mean, this probably is a question for Brad. If we are simply, let's say we start considering just adding an additional lane. I'm not talking about a center turn lane, I'm just talking about an additional lane, 3 lanes, or, do we have enough right-of-way on Zimmerman and North Long Lake Road to accommodate an additional lane, or make it from 2 to 3 or 2 to 4?
The Zimmerman issue is the one that I believe, and I think I can see Wayne back there. Isn't that one that we talked about for the safety potential of straightening part of that? Where there's that zigzag, was that on Zimmerman? And we went with the high friction course. So it's pretty narrow through there. No matter what, when you start adding it though, we don't have much that's greater than a 66-foot right-of-way. You get into the core commercial areas, we've got some 80-foot right-of-ways, some 100, maybe 120s. But when you start talking about adding lanes, even at intersections, if we're talking about adding lanes, we're definitely talking about property acquisition.
Okay.
In 90% of the cases, when you need to add that lane, we don't have enough space to really do it and keep it off of their property. I mean, you could put the back of the curb right at their property, but that's not the way to design it, because you want to have that extra area and everything else that we're talking. But 66 feet is awfully narrow for 3-lane roads, especially when they aren't necessarily coming in at a straight line, and we have to start looking at that intersection there. You'd probably be looking at adding an additional lane in more than one location. You might add 2 lanes to make it work, so that you have throughs and the rights and everything else. And you may have to have, like, that whole area which would have to be addressed as an entire analysis. You couldn't just say, okay, we're going to try and fix just this road. Because by fixing this road, all you're going to maybe do is move it down an intersection, and that's where the next problem comes. But we do, and I'm sorry, Wayne, isn't Zimmerman, we have the right-of-way north of there, that one stretch? Isn't that on a section line?
It's on a section line. Fairfield Township actually owns that right-of-way out through there. And so it would be a matter of working with Fairfield Township, because they have, I believe, electric and water main running through that section.
Yeah, so there's all these different things that have to come into discussion, and you can't look at just one in a lot of these cases when you're talking about that much congestion caused by everybody coming in and the high school. I mean, the high school is a major, major issue that causes things, so you've got to start looking at taking and making it a mandatory thing where the school's got to say, okay, we're going to help you here, we're going to get this done, but we cannot have these traffic problems caused every morning.
So as much as it pains me to say this, the general public needs to understand that as we increase these capacities, we will be purchasing land, is a polite way to say it,
Yeah, definitely.
In order to.
in large scale
Right.
Yes.
in some of these areas.
Steve?
You've not done it. Most of the Northern Michigan road commissions have not done it, but what is a common practice for the road commissions in southern Michigan, especially southeast, Wayne County, Oakland County, Macomb County, Livingston County, Genesee County, which is Flint, what they do is they try to look ahead and they say, okay, it's probably that this is going to be a 3-lane road. It's probable this is going to be a 5-lane. And then they will master plan right-of-way. And they will say, we either have the statutory 66, or we want an 86,
Yeah.
or a 120. You communicate that to the townships and see if they are willing to write that into their zoning requirements, so that when a parcel of land comes in for a subdivision, whether it's a straight-up subdivision or a condo type development, you make the developers, they have to give you the right-of-way. But it has to be part of an official right-of-way map endorsed by the road commission and acknowledged by the township. And that's how many southern counties deal with at least some of the right-of-way issues. And they still have to buy right-of-way. It's inevitable.
Still got to buy it.
But to the extent that a developer is causing the problems by generating 100, 200, 500 units, that's going to put all that traffic on your network, the least they can do is give their frontage the right-of-way that you need.
Okay.
But again, it takes a planning effort to figure all this out for you.
And have we done that?
No, we have not. We have not got to that point yet. That's something with the MPOs and,
In our specifications, we do have right-of-way widths based on the National Functional Classification. What we have not done, and we provide that information every time a developer comes in, we provide that information to the township. But we have prior agreements with the townships that state that they will honor that. So that's kind of the last step there.
Yeah.
That would
Because all those counties I mentioned, they actually have formalized agreements with not just townships, also cities and villages where there are county roads through their communities.
So, just to make sure I understand, the agreement you're referring to, what is specified in these agreements? I mean, because obviously, townships may not always know what developer is coming to their township
Right.
years later, so.
The idea is that you would publish a right-of-way map that indicates for individual roads what right-of-way you would like to have, so that when the system is fully developed and everything is built out, on this particular road, you have available to you 120 feet of right-of-way, to use an example. It would be 60 foot each side, symmetrical.
Which would allow for how big of a road?
That'd be like a 5-lane with room for sidewalk on both sides and above and below ground utilities.
Okay.
Because you're not just a road agency, you also have all these other demands on your space.
Right.
Water, sewer, electric, gas lines, there's all this other stuff that comes with having a transportation network and corridors. So 120 is considered a comfortable dimension to get all the utilities in, as well as a 5-lane with pedestrian facilities. And then the idea is you have this map, you think about it, you have discussions with the townships, work it all out, and then you will publish an official right-of-way map. And then you go to the individual township saying, okay, this is it. We need to have you, when a developer comes in, you don't know if a developer is coming or not, but when they do, they touch this road, And we've planned this maybe for only 86 right away, which is only 43 off the center line. Get it as part of the platting process, as part of the approval process for the condos, or whatever.
Okay.
I like that.
And
Yeah.
Brad, how long will something like this take to, what's a reasonable amount of time to come up with this so we can start negotiating or talking to the townships on what we need? I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Here, let me I'm the one that threw him up, I'm throwing him out there. Pulling a map together, it's really not that hard. You have to dedicate some time. Better it not to be one person. You want a couple pairs of eyes on it. That's the easy part. It's, okay, here's our first thought. Now you have to talk to you, and you have to start talking to the townships. It's the negotiation side of this that's going to chew up a lot of time.
Okay.
6 months, 9 months, something like that. You dedicate one or two people to it, they'll have a preliminary or a draft. But it's talking it out. Does this make sense? Do we really think that this is the future volume or the future vision for this road, or is it actually going to be over here? Especially when you're going from like 86 to 120. You're picking winners and losers in terms of where you think you want to put capacity into a system where you don't know where the development's going yet. So that could literally take years to work all that out, talk it all out.
But you can start with the major roads that we're dealing with right now, with the high volume.
Yeah.
And we can work backwards.
It's just like a future zoning map. I mean, this is kind of the idea of planning in general. A lot of what we deal with in this area today, sitting on boards and our staff sitting in offices, is based on the idea that nobody thought that this little town was going to turn into this massive, consistently growing county. And so much of what we do is reactivity. I mean, almost all of what I see in the city is reactivity, right? So I like the idea that in the townships where we have some available space, every township has future zoning. And so all we have to do is sit down and talk and see if where they're envisioning that area going in the future is the same place we are. And that is a much better time to have the conversation than after 12 developments are built and you've got a high school there and you've got a 2-lane road.
Yeah, we have to catch up.
So
We have to catch up.
I think the idea of the conversation, and that's another benefit of the MPO, these players are all sitting in the road. I'm not saying it's the goal of the MPO or would be the appropriate use of the MPO, but you already have that communication going.
Right.
And those same players, so I like that. I think that that's kind of the idea of being more proactive than reactive, which was the whole goal of all of this and working together. And I thought, like Larry, if we zoomed out on this map and looked at just what were the obvious points of, we've got township officials from all sides of our county sitting in this room. And if we look at what are the obvious problems, and then maybe each of them could just say, yeah, as leading my area, this is the same place, we have issues, the same place we have our residents complaining about, the same place that I hate driving every day. That's kind of one of the good things about communication of having a meeting like this, is to be able to interact and hear that. But there's obvious places. I mean, I live on the west side of town, so we all know Long Lake Road, Silver Lake Road, Cedar Run Road. I mean, we all know that's a given. But I would love to hear, from like people on the east side or the south side, like, what's going on there. I understand that we have two elephants in the room. The first one is the biggest one, and that's the city of Traverse City. Like, we don't have their streets department here, and they clearly have a different thought process about traffic and cars than most of us do. So that's in the middle of our county, and that creates a problem. And then, of course, we have the trunk lines, which are our friends at the state. But setting aside the obvious trunk line problems, there's 2-lane roads and county roads that we could be partnering together and identifying as our corridor problems. Because we all know 31, 37, 22, I mean, that's obvious. But most people like to avoid those roads, and I think that's why, like, Zimmerman and 3 Mile, like, they're all so so busy. So that's kind of like what I was hoping for today, was this discussion, more roundtable or interactive on, you know, what do we, with the data that Larry's been able to provide, what do we see? And does that match up with what our township counterparts see?
Jay, you raised your hand. You have something you want to add?
Yeah, I was just recommending Brad to not commit to a timeline. We don't talk, nothing I can get back to you.
We did talk about it at a couple meetings ago,
Yeah.
when Hyder and I were speaking about it, that the long-range we're trying to identify these corridors now that are causing us problems, that are immediate problems right now. And where do we focus? The road commission hasn't had a forward-thinking plan, and us first identifying the corridor, and then figuring out what are we going to do with them and how we fund them.
Right.
And we can identify where the problems are pretty easy, and I think we should start
It's right there.
and, you know, that's where we work from in the next 3 to 5 years. We've got these problems now that, plus, we're not going to solve them at the end of the summer. We're not going to say, we're not going to vote and say, okay, we're going to solve the Northland Lake Road, but we're going to task, engineering's going to say, yeah, the board is committed behind our plan.
Right.
We know there's people in line from Zimmerman Road to Twin Lakes in the morning.
Yeah.
We're going to figure out within the corridor what we can do, and these other spots around, the 4 or 5 worst spots around the county that we're going to identify, and we're going to try to spend some money there.
And to that point, the thing is that in order to we have to develop this plan and then discuss it with our township partners, because without that, then to your point, we can't start even the design process, and then we need to have the design process to figure out how much it's gonna cost. So it's all linked, and we have to, and the sooner we start with the process, the sooner we can get to, you know, figuring out how much it's gonna cost us, right-of-way acquisitions, things of that nature. And again, we don't have to take it all at once, but maybe if we just start with the major corridors, the major problem areas, and then work our way backwards, that to me seems to be a reasonable and sound approach.
I'm just sitting here, I'm listening, and I'm thinking, I don't know, we always have, not always, but for the most part, we have a really great representative from the road commission board that attends our monthly township board meetings. Does anybody ever attend township planning commission meetings? I know townships, a lot of townships, ours right now, we're reviewing our township master plan and doing updates to it.
That's a good point.
So
Yeah.
I would suggest that perhaps, whether it be a road commission board member or staff, actually start attending some township planning commission meetings and speaking to the planning commission members as we're all reviewing our master plans that we always do, as well as the township board meetings. But as you can see from this meeting, there's
How many townships are in the process of their master plan reviews?
You all should be just hitting ours, because our board just approved to send it out to the local communities. So we start the 60-day, 63-day
Okay.
communication with that. So it's important to get what you want real soon. And I know Brad attended our open house, so it's important to get to it. So if you wanted it next year, because our plans have it approved by January.
Okay, so we're behind the 8 ball here a little bit. Okay.
Basically, every township, if you look at the state law, they're supposed to update or at least re-endorse their master planning every 5 years.
Every 5 years.
Every 5 years. Transportation planning is supposed to be part of it, but very few townships bother. They focus on the land use side of it.
So that's one thing that we have to discuss too.
We need a little deeper dive into
We have
each
to-
township.
Yeah, we have to
each
figure out
township.
who we want to send, and with our manager here to figure out who is available, and because that's probably the best place to start, is start attending these and gather information. But I think we can do a couple of things at the same time too. We don't
Yeah,
have
well,
to
it's
kind of
obvious.
put one thing on hold just to.
Well, some of these roads are obvious.
Yeah.
Garfield's obvious.
So is Garfield the orange one going to Paradise
Yeah,
Township?
Mayfield down to Mayfield, yeah.
Down to Mayfield, yep.
That is, was that about a 10,000 car deal?
Is that called Garfield all the way?
Yeah.
Into Paradise Township?
No, to the city. To the city. From
Oh, down-
Kingsley to the city.
Yep,
Yes, it's
to
called
Kingsley.
Garfield.
It is.
Kingsley to
It's
the
still
city.
called Garfield in that part in Paradise? Okay.
Yeah.
So that, to me, looks like a significant corridor, right? A lot of people live in the Kingsley area, and they drive to other townships or
it's only
the
growing.
city, and it's definitely growing. Blair is growing enormously.
Yep.
They have a lot of units on deck and things going on with that, and obviously, they have a trunk line situation, but
Well,
there's
you can see an
more than
orange
that.
right there through the lakes.
Yeah. Long Lake is obvious, Long Lake Road. I mean, Silver Lake Road in
Silver
Garfield,
Lake, yeah.
Zimmerman is a problem. But when you look out in Doug and Beth's area, you know, if we're looking out there, you know, they both have significant trunk line roads, but also a lot of, you know, 2-lane or county roads that carry an awful lot of traffic. East Bay has a lot, you know, with 3 Mile and 4 Mile. I don't know about the peninsula. It looks like Center Road, which is also a state highway. So there's,
Yeah.
you know, some issues
Partner there.
there. But when you look at it, I mean, we've got some significant areas just in our own domain.
Well, and we are,
Garfield looks like a big deal, I would think.
It is a big deal,
All the
and-
way down to Kingsley.
and the orange section on 3 Mile there is next spring, from Hammond to South Airport.
We are widening it, right?
Well, it's, we're gonna go side to side, but not so they widen it, correct, Wayne?
Yeah.
A small section of widening from Hammond Road north until you get beyond Vanderlip, and then it'll come back down to 2 lanes.
But we're gonna pave significant shoulder,
It'll be a reconstruction, and it will include 5-foot paved shoulders.
okay. So we're beginning to address 3 Mile on that section. I do notice, you will notice that 3 Mile seems to double every section. When you come from Garfield, then you get to Hammond, then you get to South Airport, it seems to continue
Well, it
to
was all
double.
part of the bypass. That was the idea behind it. I mean, these pieces we're talking about and the obvious roads, they were all identified decades ago in the original bypass discussion. And now here we are 30 years later, and they are significant problems.
Yep.
And so talking about the bridge is one part of the solution, but all of these areas that surround it and create that backup are part of it too. And I think, I mean, to me, just Garfield looks like a big deal for those folks in East Bay and Paradise. And then, you know, obviously Long Lake Road for Garfield and Long Lake have an awful lot going on there. So if you look at the MPO boundary on here, or is Mayfield in that?
The urban boundary.
Yeah,
No.
it's not,
I think
right?
it's just outside.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're identifying things that are going to be potentially part of the MPO discussion, but if we have Paradise and Mayfield
And Blair, look at Blair.
and significant parts of East Bay Township and Blair not involved in the MPO defined area for fund use.
We have to include
So
that.
that would be something that the road commission should be taking a lead on outside of that MPO
Absolutely.
process
Yep, yep.
with those townships, you know, supervisors and boards and staff.
And that's really, again, not established very well, because I have two set pieces of data, and they really, they don't contradict each other, but you can see that they're looking in other areas
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, look at Long Lake, I mean,
Because they skip around water, isn't that what it was?
It
They
looks-
had to, yeah. But I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that Paradise, the Mayfield area, is not part of it. So us working with them, are you going through your master plan process right now? So that seems like low-hanging fruit would be a township going through their master plan. They're not part of the MPO process, and they have significant, you know, use of those roads. And all of that plays into the traffic we all get to enjoy, you know, in different townships too. So that's an important area. that just seems like really obvious when you look at the data maps. And I don't know about Acme and Whitewater as well, if there's things out there, because I don't, Whitewater was definitely not part of the MPO. I remember that. But,
Yeah, Acme is growing because,
Yes.
especially along the commercial corridor there. But they also, I mean, they have other development too, so they're going to be something that outside the MPO, which a lot of their township is, there's still some issues that will need to be addressed. So.
Most of the townships are here. What feedback have we gotten from the townships as far as, I know that we've offered the asset management, the
Right.
help planning. Have we had feedback from anybody?
Well,
Because it would be great to know, I mean, they now know what we're looking at. I mean, it's right here. Well, it's on the website too. I would love to have the townships give us feedback on what, you can kind of see where we're headed based on the color scheme up here, on what we think is important. I would very much welcome feedback from the townships so that we can all work together, because we all have to deal with the congestion. And, I don't know how politer to say
Well,
it.
and the GIS application that Larry has produced for each individual township can easily be expanded to start talking about some of these issues too. Right now, it's more of a pavement condition reporting type thing and dealing with where they want just simple resurfacing projects, especially on that 120 miles of through locals that we have absorbed as road commission responsibility, helping us guide through that. Right now, we've been very involved with Fife Lake and somewhat with Mayfield. We're trying to get times scheduled with the rest of the townships to get somebody on their staff up to date to use the program and help some of that interface back and forth. But it's hard with everybody's schedule to find these times too, that they can meet and go through this with us and start planning not just the asset management, but now these corridor studies also.
So would it make sense, considering that most of the townships here are undergoing through their master planning process, and now that we have had this session here, and a lot of the township supervisors have had an opportunity to look at the map, would it make sense to have a session where we invite the township and the planners, that in the process of developing their master plans, and even if they're not in the process right now, to now come to that session and with the projects and where they see these issues, and have them all in one room with our staff and us, and
I think that'd be an excellent idea.
discuss all these projects, rather than trying to attend different meetings and running into schedules. Put everyone in a room like this, and let's talk about those projects that you are dealing with.
Would
Does that seem like a good idea?
The townships that are here, does that sound like a good idea to you?
Works for us, because we've never.
Beth, is that something East Bay would be?
I've never heard from Ron on anything.
Yeah, Ron is not shy, but Nicole, does that work?
It does
for
make
you?
more sense. I mean, we
Yeah.
can,
So maybe it's something how we have the May meeting with the townships.
Right.
We do something similar to that then, where we just put it in middle of the day, middle of the week, so that it's kind of outside of the outskirts.
and I don't want to
And
drop the
just
ball
do it.
here. Can we do something in October? I mean,
I think
Last
we
week
could
of
set,
October?
yeah, I think we could set it up for maybe the last week in October. Obviously, we want to hit it before deer hunting season
Yeah,
starts,
before deer
because
hunting,
that's
yep.
going to affect people. And then you're into Thanksgiving and Christmas and everything
and then
else.
that way we can,
But
But I think that would be a great idea, because there is interconnectivity. So
yeah.
we will have all the townships, their planners here, we'll use this map, and then they're already in the process of working on their master plan. And so it's an opportunity to get on the same page and develop a short-term and a long-term strategy on how, short-term being the obvious congestion points, and hopefully get into some discussion with long-term strategy, in other areas that are not congested at this point, but
Correct.
obviously have the potential
That's
to
going
be.
to potentially have a problem. Like, mid-morning, have a session, maybe we'll break.
Not 8 AM.
We won't do it at 8 AM, well, it will be, it will be.
What I'm thinking is maybe we can do a mid-morning session, take a break, feed everybody, and then follow up
Yeah.
with.
And we could do it probably at Networks Northwest at their facility on Garfield. That's got enough room, plus it's got TVs everywhere. And then we'd maybe spend an hour, hour and a half at least getting started before food comes in. And while we have the food, everybody can still be talking. And then we start pulling together these ideas in the second part of it to actually start identifying specifics of where is this new development, where do the townships know development's coming, and where do they have things set aside that are potentially zoned for development here in the near future? I think that would be very helpful for us, not just in the capacity, but also in helping us schedule resurfacing, because you don't want to be out resurfacing a road that's going to be developed by a developer in a year, and they're going to destroy that road. So, I mean, I think that multiple purpose could be served with this, and we could really make a lot of headway. And maybe it's something that we say, okay, every year in October, we're going to meet to update and say, okay, this is where we stand, this is what we're looking at. And as the MPO comes on board, I think, as the funding levels come out and we start realizing what we can do with the funding, then we start becoming more aggressive when we say, okay, we've got this township that needs this, and we need to start looking at grant processes. So all of this ties together well.
And the road commission has committed to this. We authorized, I haven't done it yet, I don't think the trigger's been pulled yet, but we authorized hiring a grant writer specifically to help us identify revenue that we can use in all aspects of capacity increases.
Yeah, currently, we're using WPS to do the bridge funding.
But eventually we'll have in-house.
But eventually, we're going to need to be moving to an in-house type person.
There's a question there, Joe.
Yes.
Question, make a suggestion possibly, to some of these larger municipalities within the township, like Village of Kingsley, I would ask that they be invited.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
Absolutely.
Add a lot to the traffic issues.
Yeah.
Sure.
We've begun to try to work with the villages the best we can. I think the project in Kingsley is a good example where we were working, and I can't remember the road, I'm sorry.
It's on Kingsley Road there by the high school, where we had a section of road that was bad. The village has a section of road that was bad. We arranged the project, and they're going to pay for their portion, and we're going to pay for ours. So, yeah, we definitely have some collaboration starting to take place with the villages. But, it's definitely something, they definitely shape traffic around them, especially in Kingsley.
And it saves them money.
Yeah, and from a planning standpoint, it makes sense to have the villages be part of it, because.
Just as an informational thing, keep them updated what's going on, type situation.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think for all the people that aren't here today, we need to have the invitation explain what it is so that they know, and make sure it goes to more than just the supervisor, maybe the director of planning, or however they do that, and let them know that they can bring others, they get to choose, who goes, that it doesn't have to be just one elected official, it could be, and then, the county should also be invited as well.
Because this is not actually being broadcast, but it is being recorded, we are going to produce thumb drives for all of the agencies and all of the commissioners. So we're going to hand out a thumb drive with this whole meeting on it to each of them, so that if they were not able to attend, they can at least watch whatever part of it is of interest to
I
them.
think the history of the crossing was really valuable, and I think it helps debunk a lot of the, there's been a really long game of the kids' telephone game with the string and 2 cups. It's been going on for almost my whole life. It's about 40 years, I think. And by the time you get to 2023, even people very well-meaning may not remember specifics of the first iteration of the bridge crossing, or the second, or the third. And I think even not knowingly, they've spread maybe some information that wasn't accurate. And then, of course, the newspaper certainly didn't help our cause at all. So I think this was really valuable. So thank you to OHM for doing that. And it was valuable for me as well.
And I want to thank everyone in attendance here.
Oh, yeah.
All the township officials here who have taken the time out of their Saturday morning to be
8
here.
a.m.
This is a very important, obviously, strategic planning for us, and we can't engage in a meaningful process without the townships and the municipalities when we are talking about capacity issues. And to Elisa's point, yeah, I want to make sure that our invitation is specific so that it makes it clear that this is a planning process, so that the townships bring the appropriate officials to this.
And we really need all of them.
Yeah.
To, help put it all, and I know obviously with schedules it's not possible, but maybe at least one person from each township could be there. If it's a trustee or a planner or the supervisor, at least maybe one person, so we could have everybody in the room, from Union and Grant and Mayfield and, all the way up to the bigger ones. And I also think that Jeff Shaw and Elmwood Township should be a part of it, because they are part of the MPO and they play a significant role in several of those things that we discussed. And of course, they do have an annexed part of, the city as well, right there. So I think that they're a big part of that little congestion area right there is Elmwood. So that might be a valuable person, or his staff.
So hopefully everybody found today a little bit helpful. This board is trying to look at the next 20, 25 years. So what does Traverse City look like? What does Grand Traverse County look like? 2035, 2040. And we're trying to get ahead of the game. We do know that we're behind the game a little bit, and that we are trying to get ahead of it, because I don't see the growth slowing down. I mean, we used to play, ball hockey on the road in front of me. If I did that now, I'd get killed, because you have to wait at the end of the driveway to even get out. So work with us. Work with us, work with us, work with us. They got the engineering folks here, we got the fleet and system people here. We want to work with the townships. We know the developments are coming. We know the developments are going to continue to come. So help us get the road work, one, up to par, and two, ahead of the game, so that when you do approve your future developments, we're ready to go and we have that stuff in place. It's going to be a little heavy lifting here for a few years, but I think we'll be able to get it done, and we will be able to be much more forward-thinking 2 to 3 years from now than we are right now. So I don't know, is there anything else? We do
Public comment.
We do have to have public comment, so if anybody's got public comment, we'd greatly appreciate it. Kylie's got to read the rules. I'm sorry, Naturally, Kylie's got to read the rules. I
knows them
forgot.
by heart.
Probably recite them.
Yeah.
In person, we make an advance appointment with the board regarding road commission topics for a regular or special meeting of the meeting. If an appointment is made, the topic will be an agenda item. The following applies to public comments. Please state his or her name and address. The topic must be relevant to the commission. Individuals are allowed to speak once for up to 3 minutes on a single topic without any specified here. A group addressing the board requires a designated spokesperson who may speak up to 10 minutes, and the board will not act on any item from the public.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Hello, Rob Henschel, Grand Traverse County Commission Chair. Wanted to just say thank you to everyone. I live on 1458 3 Mile Road, East Bay Township. Wanted to thank all of you road commissioners and all of our township and otherwise officials for putting this together this morning. Definitely important to communicate with our 11 townships, 2 villages, and a city. keep in mind all those pieces that come together to form our great county, that you are charged with providing infrastructure for transportation for. One thing, and it's just great looking at these maps. I love going down, delving deep on the info. One thing we didn't really talk about is neighborhoods. And that is something that, everyone's most important road is the one that goes in front of their house. And, curious to see if there's anything we can do. We've got some crumbling roads in neighborhoods and in subdivisions that they don't affect thousands of people. That's the problem. And it seems like the only tool we've had historically or currently is really those local assessments, groups of people getting together and paying property tax assessments for the road in front of their house. And, just keep open minds and always looking for ideas what we can do for those roads. I've traveled some recently, and I like, how can you get an ambulance down this road? There's potholes big as a car, and they don't get attention. So and I do. I'll message or email you guys if I see that stuff, and you have limited options to deal with it. But let's keep in mind for our people who actually live here, they need some attention sometimes. So if there's anything we can do, thank you.
Chuck and Beth.
God, I don't know.
Is this weird? This is weird, right?
I know a lot of you people. Some better than others. Thank you very much for this meeting. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for talking. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You need to communicate better with people still. I had somebody call me the other day. We want to get a school zone in front of the new Montessori. They called the road commission. The road commission said, talk to the township. So my planner spent several hours looking up all the authorities and reasons for things to be done and communicated with her that we have no authority. This is a road commission or school issue, period. It's so easy to say, talk to the township whenever you have something that you don't want to deal with. But it's my only problem with the road commission. Thank you.
Wow, it's tough when you get a harsh comment from your husband, right?
He's rough.
I'm kidding.
I'm in his seat. I mean, come on.
Beth Friend, East Bay Township. Just a couple comments. I do want to appreciate you having this meeting. The historical walkthrough of the bridge and the East-West Corridor study was great. East Bay Township was in attendance at every single one of those East-West Corridor study meetings and very involved with the items that came out of that, as we were the first roundabout, which Brad can tell you, when I heard we were going to be the first roundabout, I wasn't necessarily the most thrilled person in the world, but we leaned into it and we had a really good collaboration. But that's another side note, but I do appreciate the meeting here this morning, even though it is 8 a.m. We will get done for football. So just a couple notes, and if you wouldn't mind, my comments are a little all over the place because I was just jotting some notes, but I just don't want you to forget. I just want to remind as the MPO comes on board, and TTCI tends to have more of an integral role in all of our administrations, that technical committee will cover a lot of ground with the communication. So, right, these are our planners, our zoning administrators, and your administration meeting every other month. So there's going to be an increased level of communication, and should be, regarding projects that are coming up, areas that are seeing more activity and that sort of thing. So perhaps a lot of I expect a lot of good things will come out of that, and maybe we can even leverage that grouping in that meeting for even more as time goes on. Another idea, the right-of-way in the zoning, that's a really unique idea. I love to steal stuff from downstate, right? Why pay to be or why be original and then have to pay for everything? Just copy them. It often works great. One just caution is when we zone, right, that's allowing people to do or not do things based on our master plan. And that affects the use and the value of their property. So increasing that right of way is essentially, may not be a taking, so to speak, but you are taking right of way. So just make sure, as those are suggested in certain areas, that they have a really, just like in a master plan, when we suggest certain usages be allowed or not allowed, that they are related back to a fundamental reason that your community expresses or needs. So just don't want it, I don't want it to seem like a panacea for future, road issues and width issues. Although I do think there may be some fertile ground for some very specific areas. We talked a little bit, I heard him mention a little bit about the wider bypass area. And I don't know if this is true, but I did want to mention something that I thought was interesting, and I think I remember it correctly, but I'm pretty sure after the meeting, OHM will tell you if I am dead wrong on this. But one of the things, you get that comment a lot, it's like, well, why isn't there just this big roundabout? You hear that a lot from people, right? Residents, drivers. And I recall hearing a statistic in the East-West Corridor study that really all of that traffic that's coming in through Nicole's area and Doug and I's area, 80% of them want to go to some place within our area. They're not wanting to take that big loop around because it's not getting them where they want to go. Most people have the intent to go someplace internal to our Grand Traverse County area. So I just something to keep in mind if it is indeed accurate. But that would definitely put less of a value on a wholesale roundabout, or not roundabout, sorry, bypass. Thank you very much. The other item is the MPO map that was up here. Just a point of note, the technical committee, speaking of which, will be meeting coming up, I think, in this month or next month? 19th. Okay, very good. And they will be talking about that area that Larry has lined out there, that they'll be looking to create the adjusted census urbanized area. So what you see there may be changed a little bit. So when we're talking about some areas that aren't included, that sort of thing, just recognize that may change. I did have two questions for you, and you can just follow up with me later or whatever, but things that I was thinking about. One is that on the East-West Corridor study, the items that have been implemented, I see part of the effect of that every day when I drive the roundabout, which is in my commute. But I'm just kind of curious, the things that have been implemented so far, how has the Road Commission found that has impacted what they were trying to achieve from a data standpoint and also just from an observational standpoint, right? So have we affected the transportation issue, the flow of traffic, and then that safety issue? And I imagine that they all move that needle in a positive way, but I was just curious as to whether there was what the thoughts and data showed on that. And then the last question that I'm most interested in is the call for projects for the MPO and what the Road Commission might submit for those. I know that the MPO doesn't necessarily create this mass, huge flush of funding that we all wish it was. It's $1 million, a lot of money. It's road projects. You guys know how quickly that goes. But I was curious on those projects. Thank you very much for your time, and again, appreciate the meeting and the invitation.
I'm going to answer one right away. The projects for the MPO, we're scheduled to work on those Thursday.
We're going to talk
correct?
about those Thursday. I talked to Wayne this morning. This coming year was Traverse City's year for the original funding under Small Urban, and they had the rest of Vets Drive from where we left off at the city limits heading north. Now, that does not mean that that would absorb the entire amount. We don't know what their scope is yet, so we need to make contact with them to see what their thinking is. But if we don't, you know, we aren't looking at something where we're going to be putting in a corridor type project at this point. But it's going to be a lot of discussion as to how is that million in the first year going to fall out? Because typically it's always been 1 year for Traverse City, 2 for the road commission, 1 for Traverse City, 2 for the road commission. That comes out of the small urban group. And so they'll be talking about that. We just need to kind of look and see what we have that we could move into the hopper. I think Wayne said our next project we had scheduled is Cass Road, and that was over 2 years, but with the monies that would come in through the MPO, we could potentially do Cass Road in 1 year.
Right. So we're going to approve those project, whatever, Thursday, transmit to the MPO technical committee Friday, or no later than 5 o'clock on Monday, which is when it's due. So we are going to meet that deadline, and I can't name off what it's going to be, but we will on Thursday. The other one, we'll have to get back to you, because I'm not sure. We'll have to pull the data and
So
get
just,
the answers for.
So you're talking about the impacts so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, not that I've actually run it continuously throughout the day, but I alternate depending on which way I'm coming in. And I will say that for my experience, driving through the roundabouts as opposed to the non-roundabout version, heading down Keystone and Beitner to get out to 37, it shaved about 4.5 minutes off my commute, which is pretty substantial, being that I only have an 18-minute commute now. It was 22 before. And then driving down Airport, it's hard because it depends on what time you hit. But I was routinely waiting through 3 to 4 light cycles, and now I'm never more than 1 full light cycle. So it's definitely improved the traffic flow.
But we'll get you more information.
And we'll get more information for you in more detail than that.
Anybody else have any comments? How about, any board member have a comment? I really do appreciate, I want to thank Garfield Township for allowing us to use your facility. We do appreciate that very much. They're ready, because we're going to make this plan work. So, and the system is going to get noticeably better in the near future. So, with that, I can take a
Motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Oh, I forgot to tell everybody you can get
Oh my God, please grab the maps.
So somebody doesn't have to haul that?
Oh my God, that's funny. Yeah, you're right, who hauled them all
I don't know.
here?
Let's wait for
Kylie's probably,
Chuck.
please
Yeah.
give out the maps.
I don't know. Just tell your husband.
Thank you, Larry. Didn't take as much of your stuff as we thought we would.
Chris East wants to, because the other supervisors are all running for re-election and he isn't, so he's like, I will tell them. They need to stop telling everybody to calm it down.
There was a lot of good interaction, though.
It's all part of getting our communication and relationships better. It's all part of that.
The road commission doing this. I think scheduling and.
I told, you know, I don't
How you doing, man? Good.
But I told like you,
that I would call, they help work on that project.
If anybody asks,
see how hard it
November-
is. Recording first call. They'll do anything. Brad is not here, but I'll say
so
this.
what does
The road commission thing is designed to loop people around to never get
That's
paid.
exactly
When
right.
you call here to Garfield Township, I went to Chuck Township, we have a lady downstairs on Kingsville, like the third road.
Yep, it's your
And I am
job.
sick of this.
We don't have a human answer.
We don't. They only
It's true.
God calls
Yeah.
and you get through. They'll tell you, our experts will call you back when we decide who that is.
And then they never get a call.
And they don't get a call back. And we have talked about
The townships don't get a call back either.
Nobody, the people who are real decision makers don't get a call back, let alone the average feedback person. Why don't we have a human? And if we do, I personally want a human.
I thought we had a human in
No, she does only on, you know, I've had some.
Only
real, like,
after you've gone through multiple iterations.
You've got to call and try to get through us.
And I know that's true, that they without running into saying, I almost think that the standard responses
Call the townships.
And I'm getting tired of that too. I mean,
You know they're sick
pure-
of it,
Yeah.
man.
And Chuck actually has the staff for that. A lot of these people are doing triple, quadruple duty
Right,
in
right.
the small
Garfield
townships.
Township has money, and they have a staff. Who else has
Yeah,
that staff?
no.
Beth has a little, some help.
Yeah, no, Beth is the one that's looking up whether, but yeah, John spent
But I
hours
think
trying
unless
to find out
it's a
about all
specific
of
road issue, they've been trained they've been trained
talk to the township.
Talk to the township.
Yeah.
It's like.
No, okay, that's good enough, 'cause what we need to do is change that to, okay, we will.
But there needs to be somebody that makes sure that somebody gets a call
I
back.
think
We
I like
have that
to
where I
Alan's
work.
point,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have to go through. It's not a. It's like a state government. You know,
Yeah.
you know that and you call
It's
them.
like
and
calling
you
DHS.
can never
I
get a
feel so
human
bad
person.
that I'm a part of this.
Yeah.
That this is the simplest thing I can't
It's like when you call a
fix.
state
But then
office,
imagine you finally get
you're not
through and they
gonna
go
talk
call
to
the
a person.
township. And then the township's like, that's not our job.
Right, it pisses me off because I know when I'm
Because none of
gonna
our
call
townships have
a
streets
state office, I'm not gonna get a live person.
It's
And I have to
constant.
Yeah,
depend
the
upon-
village of Kingsley has a streets department. If you maybe called Kingsley, if it was, they
Might
might actually
be okay.
tell you, okay, they could tell you this. You know, there's so few
Yeah.
people who can actually address these issues.
Yeah.
The township supervisors are not functioning, are not our arm. I mean, because the funding mechanism is so bad, they're stuck with us.
Yeah.
But they didn't dream of it.
No.
No, I mean, some of those.